Chapter 80. It was late at night, and the bright moon hung high in the sky. The roars of demons could be heard from time to time, which added a sense of horror to the night. On the top of the mountain before the cliff, Zhou Xuanji and Meng Tianlang were still facing off. The bone-chilling wind blew. The others were already in the state of cultivation, and only the two of them were still standing. To prevent Meng Tianlang from attacking, Zhou Xuanji said, "Very good. You are indeed great Zhou's cavalry general. I have a whole new level of respect for your endurance." Meng Tianlang was brave and smart. Although he could tell that Zhou Xuanji was up to no good, he cared about his reputation and was confident in his power, so he was in a stalemate with Zhou Xuanji. Facing Zhou Xuanji's compliment, he said with disdain, "How can you know the fierce battles that I, Meng Tianlang, have been through?" Xiao Jinghong could not help but shake his head. Meng Tianlang was good at everything, except that he paid too much attention to his morals. He would not break his promise. This was also the reason why Xiao Jinghong saw him as a lifelong enemy. But Zhou Xuanji was too cunning. He saw through Meng Tianlang with one look and forced Meng Tianlang to not dare to step down. Now Xiao Jinghong was curious about what Zhou Xuanji would do. Could he be waiting for Meng Tianlang to let his guard down and attack suddenly? But even so, it was extremely difficult to hurt Meng Tianlang. Meng Tianlang was not at inner pellet or soul fountain, but astral infant. No matter how powerful a sword technique was, it could not surpass 3 stages. Moreover, Meng Tianlang was not an ordinary person. He was extremely talented in battle. Time continued to pass. The moon set and the sun rose. When the first ray of sunlight came from the horizon, Zhou Xuanji had less than a quarter of his spirit energy left in his body. Even though he had been internalizing qi, it could not be compared to the speed at which he channeled his spirit energy. He thought to himself, "Is the spirit energy in the furious ape sword enough?" Seeing that he was frowning, Meng Tianlang thought that he was panicking, so he laughed coldly. "What? You can't find my weakness? Admit defeat and give me the dragon eagle." Zhou Xuanji said with a deep voice, "I have not drawn my sword, so the outcome is not decided yet. If you are impatient, you can cancel the agreement. If you break it, don't even think about getting my dragon eagle." Meng Tianlang heard him and snorted. The art of war says that it is better to adapt to the situation and wait for opportunities to come. I have been leading and fighting for many years. How can you compare to my patience? Compared to the dragon eagle, he wanted to surpass Xiao Jinghong more. If he defeated Zhou Xuanji, he would have defeated Xiao Jinghong. "Alright, let's continue. You said that if you regret it, you're my son. If you avoid it, you're my grandson." Zhou Xuanji thought to himself, but he was still looking at Meng Tianlang. Meng Tianlang could sense the will to fight in his eyes and was in awe of this guy's perseverance. The two continued to confront each other. The moon set and the sun rose. The third day came. The spectating cultivators were a little tired. They all internalized qi and observed. Last night someone used a spell to spread the news. Just as the sun rose, 6 cultivators came and joined the spectators. "It's really General Meng. Why does he want to fight Sword God Zhou?" Although the two of them did not fight, this silent scene makes me feel like I'm suffocating. I heard that they have been confronting each other for a few days and have yet to fight. Such determination, can you guys do it? Is the one beside Sword God Zhou the Sword Noble? Wait, the Sword Noble? The cultivators discussed among themselves. Soon, someone recognized Xiao Jinghong, which made them even more excited. The Sword Noble, Meng Tianlang, and Sword God Zhou. The 3 majestic and powerful cultivators gathered together. They cast their spells and spread the news. In the next few days, more and more people knew about this. Even the royal family and generals were alerted. More and more people came to the cliff where Zhou Xuanji and the others were. 6 days later, Zhou Qingxin, Princess Xuanya, and the other princes arrived one after another. Seeing Zhou Xuanji, Zhou Qingxin sighed in amazement. "Sir Zhou is so powerful. He faced General Meng so quickly." So this was what he meant by Great Zhou's heaven selection. Well, with his power, there is no need for him to participate in Great Zhou's heaven selection. Princess Xuanya, who was not far away, also looked at Zhou Xuanji with admiration. Ever since she met Zhou Xuanji, she felt that the whole world was talking about him. He was so dazzling. On the other side, Zhou Xuanji's hands began to tremble. It was not because he was tired, but because the energy contained in the furious ape sword was too powerful. Meng Tianlang sensed that more and more people were gathering around him. At this moment he could not make the first move. When he saw Zhou Xuanji's trembling right hand, he could not help but laugh. "Brat, are you getting tired?" Zhou Xuanji's forehead was covered in sweat. "I will get tired?" Meng Tianlang laughed coldly. Another 2 days passed. Zhou Xuanji's legs began to tremble. Meng Tianlang mocked, "Admit defeat. I'm filled with energy. You can't beat me." Zhou Xuanji stared at him. His face was covered in cold sweat. He pretended to be calm and said, "I'm going to attack." Meng Tianlang's body trembled. He understood that Zhou Xuanji could no longer find his weakness, so he decided to give it his all. He laughed and said, "You are going to attack now. It seems like you have miscalculated. If you knew this, you should have attacked straight away." Chapter 82. Nanheng's snake lord left with his wife dejectedly, not attracting any attention. Meng Tianlang, who was embedded in the mountain, was carried out. His entire body was covered in blood, his hair was in a mess, and he looked extremely miserable. If not for the rise and fall of his chest, one would have thought that he was already dead. One of the generals asked nervously, "General Meng, are you all right?" Meng Tianlang raised his head with great difficulty. His face was covered in blood, and his eyes revealed shock and horror. "I've been tricked. How was this a competition of patience? This kid was purposely trying to make him relax." At this moment, Meng Tianlang wished that he was already dead. Thinking about becoming Zhou Xuanji's slave, he spat out a mouthful of blood onto the general in front of him. Zhou Xuanji had already seen Meng Tianlang's miserable state. He smiled and said, "I'm going to have another sword slave." Northern Sword Valiant grinned and said, "It should be Dao Nu." Zhou Qingxin and Princess Xuanya were both curious. What did Zhou Xuanji mean? Zhao Congjian's relationship with Zhou Qingxin was not bad, so he explained it to him. When the two great Zhou royal family members heard this, their expressions became strange. If Meng Tianlang became Zhou Xuanji's servant, the Emperor of Great Zhou, Emperor Yan of Zhou, would be furious. After all, Emperor Yan of Zhou had high hopes for Meng Tianlang. Zhou Qingxin wanted to remind Zhou Xuanji, but he felt that it was not the right time to make sarcastic remarks, so he could only hold it in. Soon, Great Zhou's generals and princes helped Meng Tianlang to the top of the mountain. All of them looked at Zhou Xuanji furiously and wanted to tear him into pieces. Meng Tianlang stood up with difficulty. He looked at Zhou Xuanji and said with gritted teeth, "Shameless brat. You tricked me." Zhou Xuanji said calmly, "How?" "You." Meng Tianlang wanted to say something, but he did not know where to start. Zhou Xuanji only used the furious ape sword and no one else helped him. Everything was within the agreement. But he was so aggrieved. The injuries all over his body told him that he had really lost. Zhou Xuanji purposely frowned and said unhappily, "Meng Tianlang, you want to go back on your word?" In his heart he was already rolling with laughter. It felt so good. "Who asked you to look down on me? In the future I'll make you follow behind me and call me master every day." Meng Tianlang was exasperated and didn't know what to say. At this moment he noticed that Xiao Jinghong was frowning. He was instantly enraged and roared, "I'm a man of my word. Just you wait, after this great Zhou's heaven selection, I'll resign from my position as a general and work like a slave for you. Go." The surrounding generals and princes jumped in fright when they heard that. Meng Tianlang wanted to resign from his position as a general and join Sword God Zhou. They hurriedly asked as they supported Meng Tianlang away. To the generals, Meng Tianlang was a rare genius on the battlefield. For the princes, if they could rope in Meng Tianlang they would be closer to the throne. After they left, Zhou Qingxin couldn't help but sigh, "General Meng, a single mistake brings everlasting sorrow." He muttered in his heart. Wasn't Meng Tianlang very smart? Why did he suddenly become stupid? He even dared to compete in such a bet. Now he had failed miserably. Zhou Xuanji smiled. After the pill entered his body, he had the strength to stand up straight. It seemed that he would have to be more careful when using the furious ape sword in the future. He didn't want to ruin himself. Too strong. Too strong. Fang Junxing clenched his fists. He was so excited that he could not control himself, as though he was injected with chicken blood. After Zhou Qingxin chatted with Zhou Xuanji for a while, he left with Princess Xuanya, who was in a love-struck state. As the spectators left, the cliff quieted down again. Little Jiang Shui wrapped her arms around his neck and said meaningfully, "The way that princess looked at you just now, it was as though flowers were blooming." Zhou Xuanji curled his lip and said unpleasantly, "Have you forgotten who I am?" Little Jiang Shui heard him and realized that he was right. Zhou Xuanji was also a prince of Great Zhou, which was equivalent to Princess Xuanya's younger brother. She immediately beamed with joy and went to feed the dragon eagles. Xiao Jinghong walked over and took a deep breath. That slash just now was definitely not the power of an earth-grade sword technique. "Revered teacher, can you teach me?" Zhou Xuanji glanced at him and said, Learn the dual sword wills first. Haste makes waste. There will be plenty of time and opportunities to learn other sword techniques in the future. Xiao Jinghong nodded as though he was enlightened. In the next month, the news of sword god Zhou severely injuring Meng Tianlang with a single strike swept across the immortal Sundering Mountain and the entire Great Zhou. Meng Tianlang's fame had been in the top 50 of Great Zhou's reputation ranking for a long time, and he was ranked second on Great Zhou's hero ranking board. He was a sharp blade that could protect Great Zhou's future, and even Emperor Yan of Zhou praised him. Such a powerful cultivator could not even block a single strike from sword god Zhou? And almost died? In an instant, the name of sword god Zhou was spread like wildfire. He had even surpassed sword monarch Xiao Jinghong. Zhou Xuanji and the others, who were in the immortal Sundering Mountain range, did not know any of this. Zhou Xuanji continued to cultivate day after day. Xiao Jinghong, Zhao Tsongjian, Beixiao Wangjian, and Huang Lianxin trained even harder after witnessing Zhou Xuanji's slash. Little Jiang Shui was also trying her best to internalize qi, charging towards the enlightening state. As Fang Junxing watched them practice, he would also follow suit. As time passed, his understanding of the sword Dao also increased. On this day, Zhou Xuanji easily broke through to enlightening level 8. He was getting closer to the inner pellet realm. Zhao Tsongjian only broke through to inner pellet at the age of 18, and he was already crowned as the only one in history. Zhou Xuanji's goal was to break through to inner pellet before the age of 15. Judging from the current situation, it was not a difficult task. In front of the cliff, Xiao Jinghong held 2 swords in his hands and used 2 different sword techniques. He looked very impressive. He still had not mastered dual sword wills, but the speed at which he switched between his sword wills was much faster than before. Zhou Xuanji stood at the side and nodded occasionally. This disciple of his had good comprehension. He estimated that he would be able to master dual sword wills in less than half a year. Zhao Tsongjian ran over and said respectfully, "Master, the 36 paths Jade Xiao sword has many transformations. There is something I don't understand." "Speak." Zhou Xuanji nodded and listened to Zhao Tsongjian's questions. He sighed in his heart. How are they sword slaves? They are all disciples. But he quite liked the process of nurturing them. What's the fun of traveling the world alone? With sword slaves, disciples, and maidservants, I can travel anywhere in the world. Whoever dares to cause trouble, sword slaves go. After Zhao Tsongjian's questions were answered, he left in satisfaction and continued to practice. Zhou Xuanji turned around and asked, "Will Meng Tianlang really keep his word?" Xiao Jinghong replied as he practiced, "Of course. But the Meng clan and the great Zhou royal family might not agree to it. He needs time to settle everything. A year later we will have a battle. He can't run away." Zhou Xuanji nodded. If he were Emperor Yan of Zhou, how could he let go of such a talent? Shortly after, he continued his cultivation in peace and could not be bothered to think about this. 4 days later, he celebrated his 13th birthday. Analyzed that the sword owner has reached 13 years old. Gotcha started. Ding. Congratulations, the sword owner obtained gold water driving sword, white dragon golden robe, 300 pieces of 3rd grade spirit stones. The sword spirit's voice came as expected. Zhou Xuanji, who was internalizing qi, opened his eyes. Another gold grade legendary sword. Now he had 5 gold grade legendary swords. They were the Hell King sword, Thunderclap sword, Bloodbath sword, Furious Ape sword, and this water driving sword. Good luck. In the future, not only will I be the top swordsman in the world, but I'll also be the top commander in the world. Little Jiang Shui covered her mouth and chuckled. Yes, yes, yes. You're the most handsome. She suddenly thought of something and became discouraged. With a bitter face she said, "Your clothes are really beautiful. I'm afraid the clothes I knitted for you can't compare." Zhou Xuanji comforted her. "It's okay, I understand your intentions. Don't knit any more in the future lest it hurts your hands." After the age of 12, his height began to increase by leaps and bounds. Now he was already at little Jiang Shui's eyebrows. He looked at the 17-year-old Jiang Shui. No, Jiang Shui. Zhou Xuanji was filled with amazement. The flower finally bloomed. Jiang Shui felt regret and disappointment. But when she looked up and met Zhou Xuanji's gaze, the gentleness in his eyes made her disappointment disappear immediately. She smiled sweetly and said, "I'll listen to you." The 2 of them stood at the edge of the cliff and began to chat. They talked about the jokes of the past and their hopes for the future. As they chatted, the 2 of them sat at the edge of the cliff. Jiang Shui could not change her bad habit. Once she got close to Zhou Xuanji, she could not help but feel up to him. And so, she wrapped her arms around Zhou Xuanji's neck. Zhou Xuanji said helplessly, in another year your arms will get sore if you hug me like this. Jiang Shui smiled without a care, it's okay. You can hug me when the time comes. Hey, don't you understand? Men and women should not touch each other. We are all grown up. Hey, why are you talking to me about this? Don't we always sleep in the same room? Okay, from today onwards, let's sleep in separate rooms. You dare. The two of them began to quarrel, and the others were envious of them. Northern Sword Valiant sighed, back then I had a childhood friend like him too. Fang Junxing asked curiously, what about now? Gone. Northern Sword Valiant replied calmly. After that, he turned around and left, leaving Fang Junxing with a lonely and bleak silhouette. This was a man with a story. Fang Junxing rubbed his chin and thought. Time passed quickly. Another 5 months had passed. Zhou Xuanji broke through to enlightening level 9, and the first stage of the Great Zhou Heaven selection came to an end. Following the shocking news of Sword God Zhou defeating Meng Tianlang, the cultivators who passed by the cliff dared not to cause trouble. Even the demon kings did not dare to get close. However, the peace was still broken. This day a group of soldiers came on a cloud. There was a carriage on top of it. The carriage was luxurious and luxurious. It was more than 3 times the size of an ordinary carriage and looked like a small building. Zhao Congjian, Xiao Jinghong, Northern Sword Valiant, and the others gathered around Zhou Xuanji. Great Zhou's Meng clan's flag. It should be Meng Tianlong's elder. Xiao Jinghong said softly. The leader of the soldiers held a huge flag with the word Meng carved on it. Zhou Xuanji squinted his eyes and did not speak. Soon, the Meng clan soldiers stopped in front of the cliff. The curtain of the carriage was pulled open, and a middle-aged man wearing a black robe with python patterns walked out slowly. His sideburns were like fire, his body was muscular and he had a stocky build. Just by standing there he gave people a strong sense of oppression. He stared at Zhou Xuanji and said, You are Sword God Zhou? Zhou Xuanji asked, Who are you? Meng Clan Meng Changhu, Great Zhou's second-rank general king. I feel that the bet between my nephew Tianlang and you should be discussed at length, so I came specially. The middle-aged man in black leaped up and landed in front of Zhou Xuanji and the others. His boldness was even stronger than Meng Tianlong's. Xiao Jinghong, Zhao Congjian, and Northern Sword Valiant were all prepared for battle. Fang Junxing lowered his head and hid behind Huang Lianxin. He did not dare to look at Meng Changhu directly. I wasn't the one who forced him to make this bet. Zhou Xuanji said casually, which made Meng Changhu frown. He frowned and the pressure grew stronger. He looked at Zhou Xuanji's face carefully. Suddenly, his expression changed slightly, and a strange look flashed in his eyes. If you have any requests, just tell me. Meng Changhu said calmly, but his eyes flickered with a strange look. There's no room for discussion. Zhou Xuanji replied. If he let this go, he would lose face. Meng Changhu flicked his sleeves and turned around. He pointed at Fang Junxing and said, You come here. Follow me home. If your father knew that you are such a coward, your wives and concubines can forget about living. Fang Junxing heard him and his expression changed drastically. He could only grit his teeth and walk up to him. Meng Changhu grabbed his shoulder and flew up to the clouds. Zhou Xuanji did not stop him. Fang Junxing was not his sword slave yet, and Meng Changhu was not Fang Junxing's enemy. He had no reason to stop him. Meng Changhu walked into the carriage and the soldiers left on the clouds. Prince Xuanji, His Majesty was right. You will be the top prodigy in Great Zhou's history. You have perfectly inherited the royal bloodline of Great Zhou. But I have to give you a piece of advice. The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. Meng Changhu's voice came suddenly, and Zhou Xuanji's expression changed. The others did the same and looked at Zhou Xuanji. Chapter 84. Master. You are the Prince of Great Zhou? Zhao Congjian could not help but ask. His expression was complicated, and he could not help but think of Zhou Qingxin. If Zhou Qingxin knew Zhou Xuanji's identity, wouldn't he vomit blood? The powerful cultivator that he tried so hard to rope in was actually his brother. Xiao Jinghong was in deep thought. Beixiao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin were shocked, but they did not ask. Zhou Xuanji wanted to kill the Empress of Great Zhou, so why would it be impossible for him to be the Prince of Great Zhou? Little Jiang Shui looked at Zhou Xuanji worriedly. She knew what kind of danger he would face if his identity was exposed. Zhou Xuanji stared at the direction where Meng Changhu's group left and said calmly, Yes, I am the son of Lady Zhao Xian, Zhou Xuanji. Lady Zhao Xian. Everyone's expression changed. They still remembered the shocking incident 11 years ago clearly. Back then, in order to search for Lady Zhao Xian and her son, Great Zhou went to great lengths. All the kingdoms helped, but both mother and son died in the end. I see, Huang Lianxin mumbled to herself. No wonder Zhou Xuanji wanted to kill the Empress of Great Zhou. All the questions were answered immediately. Back then, Emperor Yan of Zhou favored Lady Zhao Xian, which made the Empress jealous. It was not a secret. Xiao Jinghong squinted his eyes and said, back then when revered teacher was just born he was loved by the emperor. But Lady Zhao Xian's family rebelled at this time. There must be more to it than meets the eye. Beixiao Wangjian nodded and guessed. If they did not rebel, Lady Zhao Xian's family would have a meteoric rise. After the rebellion, the one who benefited the most was the Empress of Great Zhou. Zhao Songjin walked up to Zhou Xuanji and half knelt. I will definitely kill my way into the Great Zhou royal palace for master and avenge you. Although he was a sword slave, Zhou Xuanji treated him just as well as Xiao Jinghong. He never treated him harshly. He did not express his feelings, but he remembered them in his heart. Beixiao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin saw this and knelt down as well. We will go through fire and water for master. Wherever master goes, I will go. Even if there is a slim chance of survival. Both of them looked resolute and fearless. Xiao Jinghong knelt down as well and cupped his fists. A teacher for a day is a teacher for life. Now that I, Xiao Jinghong, have acknowledged you as my master, your matters are my matters. Even if the enemy is the Emperor of Great Zhou, I will definitely stand before you. Looking at the four people in front of him, Zhou Xuanji felt a little teary. Other than Jiang Shui, he didn't expect to get four other people who would risk their lives for him. He laughed heroically and said, What are you doing? Hurry up and get up. I value my life more than you do. I won't bring you to your deaths. The atmosphere was no longer tense. Everyone smiled and stood up. Jiang Shui smiled and said, With Xuanji's talent, it will be easy for him to take revenge in the future. Zhou Xuanji nodded and smiled. We promise to travel the world together. Master, let's make a deal. After you get your revenge, we'll go to the holy land of the sword, 10,000 Swords Divine Mountain. How about that? Xiao Jinghong smiled as a yearning look appeared on his face. Zhao Songjin's eyes brightened. The legendary 10,000 Swords Divine Ridge? It really exists? Xiao Jinghong nodded. Jiang Shui, Beixiao Wangjian, and Huang Lianxin were all curious. They did not know much about the northern wilderness region. Not to mention the northern wilderness region, they had not even explored the entire Great Zhou dynasty. Zhou Xuanji laughed and said, Go. Of course. In the future, wherever you want to go, we will go. The group looked at each other and laughed. Even in the face of the Empress' threat, they still laughed heartily. After chatting for a while, they decided to leave this place. Since Meng Changhu could recognize Zhou Xuanji's identity, it meant danger. Who knew which faction Meng Changhu belonged to? Now that the ascension of Emperor Yan of Zhou was getting closer, the fight for the throne was getting more and more intense. Zhou Xuanji did not want to die recklessly. He could not just shout, I'm the Prince of Great Zhou, Zhou Xuanji. If he did so, he would die even faster. After all, Zhou Yalong had the highest chance of becoming the emperor. He had already won over half of the royal court, and the empress was even more powerful in the royal palace. Even though Emperor Yan of Zhou had great powers, it was extremely difficult for Zhou Xuanji to appear before him. Wu, Ah Big roared in the sky and the group flew on their swords. Jiang Shui hugged Zhou Xuanji's waist, while the three-eyed drought rodent was in his arms. The little black snake laid on the three-eyed drought rodent's head and exclaimed, Impressive. I didn't expect you to be a prince of the Great Zhou dynasty, and of the royal bloodline of the Great Zhou dynasty? Your father is a top-notch almighty in the northern wilderness region, and he is world-shaking. It talked endlessly as if it was Emperor Yan of Zhou's son. Zhou Xuanji ignored it and headed deeper into the immortal Sundering Mountain range. Along the way they encountered many cultivators. Seeing Zhou Xuanji, those cultivators could not contain their excitement and continuously cried out. They flew for 1,000 li. Zhou Xuanji learned a lot of news. He was already ranked third on the Great Zhou honor ranking. It even overshadowed the brilliance of Great Zhou's Heaven's selection. Defeating Meng Tianlang was not enough to cause such a stir. It was mainly because of the accumulation of his previous achievements. The Demon Emperor's son, North Zhou Gale Sword, Zhao Congjian, Xiazong, Meng Tianlang, Sword God Zhou, who appeared out of nowhere, was already a legend in the eyes of the people. He was an undefeated legend. How powerful was Meng Tianlang? He was defeated by a single sword strike and almost died. How powerful was Sword God Zhou? Within Great Zhou, it was widely believed that Sword God Zhou had already surpassed the astral infant stage. There were very few experts who surpassed the nascent soul realm, and it was difficult for a dynasty to produce one in 1,000 years. Even within the dynasty they would be top experts and would be roped in by the court. Tiske, if this continues, will people think that you are more powerful than the sword monarch of Great Zhou? Jiang Shui rested her chin on Zhou Xuanji's shoulder and asked with a smile. The strong wind messed up her hair and she could only squint her eyes. Even so, she was still beautiful. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, Sword God and Sword Monarch, who's more powerful? Can't you tell from their names? Bullshit, but you'll definitely be stronger than him in the future. Jiang Shui pinched Zhou Xuanji's face and giggled. Hey, I'm flying on my sword. Be careful not to get into an accident. Zhou Xuanji cried out loudly, which frightened Jiang Shui so much that she immediately stopped. The others were also laughing. Thinking back to that sword strike from that day, they still felt amazed. They traveled for 7 days. The group found a valley that was open and surrounded by mountains. There was a lake, flowers and trees in the valley. It was suitable for living. After checking in, everyone continued to cultivate. Zhou Xuanji's goal was to break through to Inner Pellet as soon as possible. Next, every month he would send Xiao Jinghong and Zhao Tsongjin out to find out about the Empress' visit to Merciful Melody Cliff. One thing was for sure. Before Great Zhou's heaven selection ended, the Empress, as the mother of the empire, would not go out. 4 months later, Zhou Xuanji successfully broke through to enlightening level 10. At the same time, Jiang Shui and Huang Lianxin reached foundation building level 10. Beixiao Wangjian received a lot of resources and reached enlightening level 8. Zhao Tsongjian received a year of guidance from Zhou Xuanji and began to break through to Soul Fountain. The entire group was becoming more powerful quickly. This day, Great Zhou's heaven selection's first round ended. Great Zhou's army retreated from Immortal Sundering Mountain. Immortal Sundering Mountain welcomed peace. The demons no longer hid and came out to roam the world. Whoosh, in the valley, Zhou Xuanji, who was cultivating, felt a gust of cold wind. Immortal Sundering Mountain was like spring all year round, and it was rare to have such a cold wind. He looked up instinctively and his expression changed. He saw a silhouette standing on the top of a mountain. Chapter 85. There's someone. Everyone be careful. Xiao Jinghong's voice came from a tree not far away. Zhao Tsongjian and Beixiao Wangjian, whom he was teaching, turned around as well. Jiang Shui and Huang Lianxin, who were bathing the dragon eagles by the lake, also became alert. The little black snake, who was sleeping soundly on the three-eyed drought rodent's head, quivered and raised its head to look. His Majesty said that you were the chosen one, but you died at the age of 2 and became a joke. I didn't expect you to still be alive. An old voice sounded. His tone was indifferent and it was impossible to tell what he was feeling. Zhou Xuanji's heart trembled. People from the Great Zhou Empire? Before he could say anything, Xiao Jinghong asked, Who exactly are you and why have you come here? Sword King Xiao Jinghong? You're quite a character, but it's a pity that you've followed the wrong person. The world will belong to the second prince in the future. Zhao Xian's son must die. The ancient voice came again. After that, he leaped up and dived down toward Zhou Xuanji. He rushed out of the sunlight and revealed his true self. He was dressed in a loose black robe and his face was like an eagle's. His white hair fluttered in the wind, and he was like an evil demon that had been born. Zhou Xuanji took out the Hell King sword and Thunderclap sword and prepared to fight. Xiao Jinghong's treasured sword shot towards the black-robed elder like a sharp arrow. Master, this person is also at the nascent soul realm. Leave him to me. Xiao Jinghong bellowed and leaped into the air. He took out another sword and slashed at the black-robed old man. After the black-robed old man dodged the incoming sword, he flipped his right hand, and a black wooden scepter appeared in his hand. The top of the scepter looked like a scorched claw and it was horrifying. The scepter and the sword clashed together, causing sparks to fly and an ear-piercing sound. Xiao Jinghong turned around and caught the other sword with his left hand. Wielding his sword with both hands, he moved like a swallow and fought fiercely with the black-robed old man in the air. The two of them attacked extremely quickly, and even Zhou Xuanji was dazzled by their movements. Zhao Tsongjian looked at the sky with a burning gaze. This guy had forgotten about the danger. He only felt excited and wanted to learn something. Xiao Jinghong's swords were like the wind, and his attacks were swift and fierce, similar to Zhou Xuanji's style. The black-robed old man held the scepter in his hand, and strands of evil qi seeped out from the scepter, turning into numerous ghost heads that surrounded Xiao Jinghong. Compared to Xiao Jinghong, the black-robed old man's movements were bold and majestic, and he had the aura of a general. Zhou Xuanji frowned slightly. He could tell that Xiao Jinghong did not have the upper hand. From the looks of it, this person was at the peak of the nascent soul realm. Its 100-meter-long body was awe-inspiring and gave off an unstoppable aura. Clang, clang. Xiao Jinghong suddenly appeared in front of the black dragon and stabbed with both swords. The swords pierced through the black dragon's head and into Qin Chitsuan's shoulders. So fast. Zhao Congjian opened his eyes wide and cried out in disbelief. He did not see Xiao Jinghong's movement trajectory at all. Qin Chitsuan was shocked too. He saw that Xiao Jinghong was surrounded by two types of sword wills, one green and one white, each occupying half of his body. The sword chi was visible to the naked eye. He stared at Qin Chitsuan coldly as though he was looking at a dead man. This is two types of sword wills? How can it be? Qin Chitsuan cried out in shock. He suddenly remembered that Sword God Zhou was proficient in dual sword wills. Xiao Jinghong learned dual sword wills by following Sword God Zhou? Before he could think further, Xiao Jinghong relied on dual sword wills and unleashed an unprecedented attack, which forced him back step by step. He learned dual sword wills. Beixiao Wangjian mumbled to himself. His tone was a little bitter. This was his talent. Comparing oneself to others would only make one angry. Zhou Xuanji shook his head slightly. He could tell that Xiao Jinghong only broke through in the face of danger, and his dual sword wills were not stable. After being slashed by Xiao Jinghong for dozens of times, Qin Chitsuan was covered in blood. He went completely berserk and roared. The black dragon materialized again and grew even bigger. Xiao Jinghong stepped back suddenly. He held the sword in his right hand in front of him and the sword in his left hand behind his back. The blade was pointed at the center of his brows. His eyes were cold and sharp, and he was prepared to kill Qin Chitsuan in one strike. The two sword wills transformed into green and white flames, and his aura grew even more powerful. Swoosh! He transformed into a beam of light that alternated between green and white and charged toward Qin Chitsuan. Boom! The black dragon collapsed, and Xiao Jinghong's swords pierced through Qin Chitsuan's abdomen. Blood splattered. The black-robed old man hit Xiao Jinghong's back with his staff, and the sound of bones breaking was extremely clear. Next, Qin Chitsuan slammed into the mountain wall, while Xiao Jinghong fell to the bottom of the valley. The impact swept up a cloud of dust. Zhou Xuanji and the others immediately surrounded him. Xiao Jinghong coughed up blood continuously and no longer had the strength to stand up. Almost. Damn, Xiao Jinghong said with dissatisfaction. He spoke with great difficulty. Zhou Xuanji squatted in front of him and said, "You have done well." His opponent was not an ordinary person. It was not easy for Xiao Jinghong to injure him so severely. At this moment, a horrifying aura exploded from the mountain wall. A black dragon emerged from the hole in the mountain wall. Qin Chitsuan, who was covered in blood, flew out slowly. His face was hideous. He covered his abdomen with his left hand, and blood gushed out from between his fingers. Xiao Jinghong, I'm going to make you wish you were dead but unable to. Qin Chitsuan roared with gritted teeth. His eyes were filled with madness. Everyone was shocked and got up to fight. Zhou Xuanji took a step forward and said, "Take good care of him." After that, strands of black qi came out from the Hell King's sword and formed into the Hell King, which attached itself to his body. The thunderclap sword emitted lightning that surrounded the Hell King, which looked like the god of thunder. Chapter 86. Seeing the Hell King's image on Zhou Xuanji's body, Qin Chitsuan was shocked in his heart. But Zhou Xuanji did not even have the cultivation of inner pellet. Even though he was heavily injured, he could not defeat him. He laughed disdainfully and said, "What? Is Prince Xuanji prepared to fight to the death?" The princes of the great Zhou dynasty were extremely noble. Now that he could personally torture Emperor Yan of Zhou's beloved son, he felt somewhat excited. Zhou Xuanji coldly looked at him and legendary swords appeared behind him. Crimson Dragon Sword, Frost Wave Sword, Bloodbath Sword, Tiger Roar Sword, Windcutter Sword, Swine Culling Sword, Golden Rock Sword, Heaven Sound Sword, Afterimage Sword, Formless Sword, Furious Ape Sword, Chicken Slaying Sword, Water Driving Sword. Zhao Congjian, Beixiao Wangjian, Xiao Jinghong and Huang Lianxin were all stunned. Not just 10 swords. Qin Chitsuan's laughter became even more arrogant as he said disdainfully, "No matter how many swords there are, it's all futile." After saying this, he bent down and charged forward. The massive black dragon bore down on Zhou Xuanji like a mountain. With the Hell King sword and Thunderclap sword in hand, Zhou Xuanji bent his legs and charged forward with the other 13 legendary swords. The Crimson Dragon sword vibrated, and a Crimson Dragon soul roared out. The Frost Wave sword trembled and waves of cold air shot out. The tiger roar sword let out a tiger roar, the heavenly sound sword let out a series of bewildering sounds, the afterimage sword turned into countless afterimages, and the furious ape sword roared. It was just one person, but he had the power of a magnificent army shaking the entire valley. Qin Shi Tzuan's expression changed slightly. In his eyes, Zhou Xuanji's speed suddenly increased. At this moment, Zhou Xuanji could no longer be measured by the enlightening stage. He was the Netherworld King. The soul of the Crimson Dragon collided with the Black Dragon first. Although it was torn apart by the Black Dragon, it also caused the Black Dragon to pause for a moment. Zhou Xuanji activated Vibrant Raindrop Sword Will and Tempest/Sword Will. His speed was extremely fast. The two swords merged together and pierced through the Black Dragon's body as he charged toward Qin Shi Tzuan. Qin Shi Tzuan had been severely injured by Xiao Jinghong, so his strength was no longer at its peak. He subconsciously swung his scepter, but the two gold-ranked divine swords directly broke his scepter. Impossible. Qin Shi Tzuan was greatly shocked in his heart. This was a 5th-tier transcendent grade magic tool. How could it be so weak? The Hell King sword and the Thunderclap sword pierced his chest. Lightning exploded and wreaked havoc on his body, causing him to raise his head and scream in pain. How dare you bully my disciple? I want to see who will suffer a fate worse than death. Zhou Xuanji's face was cold. He pulled his hands outward and slashed horizontally with both swords, tearing open Qin Shi Tzuan's chest. Blood splattered across the sky. Subsequently, the other 13 divine swords revealed their divine might in succession. Sword lights flickered as they slashed and slashed madly, and Qin Shi Tzuan was like a wooden stake that was slashed to the point his flesh and blood splattered in all directions. It was an extremely miserable scene. The unimaginable pain almost made him faint. He abruptly transformed into a cloud of black mist and dissipated on the spot, appearing out of thin air on the mountain wall 100 feet away. He breathed heavily, his eyes bloodshot. He was no longer a perfect person, looking horrifying and terrifying. Who are you? How dare you possess Prince Xuanji's body? Qin Shi Tzuan stared at Zhou Xuanji and asked with difficulty. No matter how devilish Zhou Xuanji was, it was impossible for him to be so powerful. It was completely illogical. Little did he know that his guess was only half correct. Zhou Xuanji did not possess someone else's body and reincarnate, but he retained the memories of his previous life. Remember, I have another name, Sword God Zhou, the god of the sword's way. Zhou Xuanji cried out coldly. He could tell that Qin Shi Tzuan, who was severely injured, could be killed. Since he could kill him, then he had to act tough. After that, he activated the Tri-Source Vein-Severing Sword. Countless sword chi surged out and drowned Qin Shi Tzuan. Boom, 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 the mountain wall exploded. Countless rocks fell down and a cloud of dust swept up. Ah, Sword God Zhou? Zhou Xuanji. You will die a horrible death. Her Majesty the Empress will send even more experts to capture you. She will make you suffer a fate worse than death, just like your damned grandfather. Qin Shi Tzuan cried out hoarsely. His tone was filled with hatred. Soon his voice stopped. He was dead. Swoosh! A baby shrouded in black light suddenly rushed out of the rubble and dust, flying towards the sky at high speed. Astral infant. Zhou Xuanji's eyes focused and threw out the bloodbath sword straight away. Ranged sword propelling. Could slash an enemy from 100 miles away. Just when Qin Shi Tzuan's astral infant flew over the mountain, the gold-grade legendary sword slashed toward it. Like a flying knife cutting a watermelon, Qin Shi Tzuan's astral infant was slashed into pieces. Zhou Xuanji, who was standing on the formless sword, levitated in the air like a celestial being. His body was surrounded by legendary swords. He looked upward at the place where blood bloomed. The bloodbath sword circled in the air and flew toward Zhou Xuanji. This scene was like a painting. It shocked Jiang Shui, Xiao Jinghong, Zhao Congjian, Beixiao Wangjian, Huang Lianxin, and the little black snake. Even the three-eyed drought rodent, big and small air's eyes were beaming. How domineering. Jiang Shui mumbled, my Xuanji has really grown up. Xiao Jinghong was dazzled. He could not imagine such a scene in his entire life. Zhou Xuanji stored his sword and landed in front of Xiao Jinghong. He stared at Beixiao Wangjian and said, hurry up and heal him. Beixiao Wangjian came back to his senses and quickly took out some pills. Zhou Xuanji looked at Zhao Congjian and said, go and search. See if the old man left anything behind. Yes. Zhao Congjian held back his excitement and left. Jiang Shui walked up to Zhou Xuanji and patted off the dust on his body. Xuanji, you are so awesome, she said with an excited smile. Ever since Zhou Xuanji's identity was exposed, she addressed him as Xuanji without holding back. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, Haven't I always been awesome? Jiang Shui nodded heavily. She could not stop the smile on her face. Huang Lianxin sighed in amazement. You even killed an astral infant. I feel that no matter how powerful the enemy is, Master has a way to deal with them. The three-eyed drought rodent ran over with the little black snake and jumped onto Zhou Xuanji's shoulder. The little black snake said excitedly, I'm really convinced. Little brat, I will follow you from now on. Can you treat me better? Zhou Xuanji ignored it and said to Xiao Jinghong, I comprehended dual sword wills during this crisis, but it's not stable enough. You have to practice more in the future. After Xiao Jinghong consumed the pills, he had recovered much of his qi and blood. He tried his best to squeeze out a smile and said, Your disciple will remember. Soon Zhao Congjian returned with 3 storage rings. Once Qin Chitsuan died, his soul imprint disappeared from the rings so they were ownerless. Zhou Xuanji inspected them and said without a smile, Not bad. Pack up and get ready to leave Immortal Sundering Mountain. Jiang Shui asked, Where are we going? Zhou Xuanji said, To the border of Great Zhou and wait for the Empress to leave the court. No one had any objections. 4 hours later, Xiao Jinghong's injuries were mostly healed and they left. Zhou Xuanji and Jiang Shui rode on Ah Big's back, while Huang Lianxin rode on Small Air's back. The others flew on their swords. After they left the valley, Zhou Xuanji first recovered the spiritual qi in his body. He flipped his right hand and took out the furious ape sword. He tilted his head and instructed, Look after me. If I need anything, help me immediately. Don't let me fall. Jiang Shui, who was hugging his waist, asked in confusion, What are you going to do? Zhou Xuanji said calmly, Charge up and wait for the dogs to come. Chapter 87. A violent gale blew against Zhou Xuanji's face, and his hands felt a little sore. He had been holding the sword for 3 days and 3 nights. Every time he stopped to rest, he had to rely on Jiang Shui's support. Zhao Congjian flew to Ada and asked, Master, how much longer are you going to hold it up? Jiang Shui poured out the pill and fed it to Zhou Xuanji personally. Zhou Xuanji said calmly, Don't ask so much. You will understand later. Zhao Congjian became even more curious. He thought about the scene when Zhou Xuanji was dealing with Meng Tianlang and understood something. He took a deep look at the furious ape sword, then he rode his sword to increase the distance between them. Xiao Jinghong smiled and said, There are great mountains and rivers in front of us. My appointment with Meng Tianlang at the border is coming soon. Wait for my good news then. Northern Sword Valiant followed behind him and asked in surprise, Are we not allowed to follow? Zhao Congjian, Huang Lianxin, and Jiang Shui all looked toward Xiao Jinghong. Xiao Jinghong shook his head and said, You can't. This battle has long been known to the public, and the Great Zhou dynasty is secretly promoting it to pave the way for Meng Tianlang. If Master goes, you will definitely run into Zhou Yalong and the Empress's minions. It will be very dangerous and even 10 of me would not be able to withstand it. Everyone came to a realization. Zhou Xuanji glanced at Xiao Jinghong and asked, If you win, will there be any trouble? Between Xiao Jinghong and Meng Tianlang, who was stronger? As a master, he naturally trusted his disciple unconditionally. With Laozi's dual sword will here, how can a mere Meng Tianlang be enough to kill? Xiao Jinghong laughed and said, Does the Great Zhou dare to touch me in front of everyone? Even in this immortal-like world, most people still cared about their face. The higher one stood, the more they cared about their face. Everyone smiled at each other and continued forward. For the next 7 days they did not encounter any trouble. Zhou Xuanji's face was pale. With Jiang Shui's nourishment, his spirit energy was not depleted. However, he had been accumulating power for 10 days and his arms were really sore. Damn it, did I miscalculate? Zhou Xuanji mumbled and Jiang Shui, who was behind him, could not help but giggle. She reached out to massage his arm and said with a smile, Isn't it good to miscalculate? What if you get injured during the fighting? Zhou Xuanji sighed. Jiang Shui was right. However, he inexplicably hoped that there would be enemies and that he would be able to seize the treasure. No, I can't have such thoughts. In this world one cannot rely on surfing. Time passed. Another 10 days passed. Zhou Xuanji charged up for 20 days. He could sense the horrifying energy contained in the furious ape sword, which was enough to destroy the world. If Meng Tianlang came again he would definitely tear him to pieces. Xiao Jinghong fully recovered with the help of some healing pills. He glanced at the furious ape sword in Zhou Xuanji's hand and swallowed his saliva. Back then, how long did Zhou Xuanji wait to kill Meng Tianlang? It was too scary. Xiao Jinghong sympathized with those who were about to kill Zhou Xuanji. Master, There is still half a day before we leave the great Zhou dynasty. Zhao Tsongjian turned around and said. He could not help but glance at the furious ape sword. After all, Xiao Jinghong was even more frightening to him. Zhou Xuanji's face was covered in sweat and his face was pale. His arms trembled continuously. If not for Jiang Shui's support, he would have fallen long ago. At first glance, he thought that Zhou Xuanji was dying. Zhou Xuanji squeezed out a smile and said, "So soon? What a pity." When everyone heard this, they burst into laughter, holding their bellies. 2 hours later, they passed by Wuxia City. The city was not big and they would reach the border pass of Great Zhou in a few dozen miles. Looking at the bustling streets below, Beixiao Wangjian sighed, "If it were me in the past, I would definitely like to stay in a crowded city. But now, I like the feeling of running around." Zhao Tsongjian smiled and said, "Or else, how can there be so many tourists in the world?" The group was chatting and laughing, and they did not look like they were running for their lives. They were about to pass by Wuxia City. "Sword God Zhou. Stop right there. You killed the third-grade royal guard Qin Shitsuan. Today we will uphold the dignity of Great Zhou." A roar suddenly came from behind him. Everyone turned to look, only to see a burly man wearing heavy tiger head armor leading a group of tigers and wolves soaring through the clouds. At a glance there were at least 300 of them. The hundreds of thousands of people in Wuxia City were stunned. Sword God Zhou? He killed the third-grade royal guard Qin Shitsuan? Xiao Jinghong's expression changed and cried out, "Oh no! It's Tai Yulong. His cultivation is at astral infant level 10, only one step away from astral projection. The royal soldiers behind him are all elites, all at Soul Fountain." The group heard him and their expressions changed drastically. Only Zhou Xuanji was excited. He said with a trembling voice, "Quick, help me up." Seeing this group of people, he almost cried, "Oh my God! You are finally here." Jiang Shui quickly helped him up. Seeing that Tai Yulong and the 300 royal soldiers were getting closer, Zhou Xuanji's lips began to tremble. If they did not come soon, he would not be able to hold on any longer. He held his sword with both hands and shouted at Tai Yulong and the others, "I, Sword God Zhou, have never offended the great Zhou Empire. The Empress sent people to kill me for no reason. Is there still justice in Great Zhou?" With so many people below, it was a good opportunity to pour cold water on the Empress. After that, Zhou Xuanji slashed furiously. This slash was accompanied by the roar of an ancient furious ape, which shocked the heavens and the earth and made the gods weep. It was such an exhilarating slash. I held it in for 20 days. A whole 20 days. Roar! The roar of the ancient furious ape was so deafening that everyone felt dizzy and their ears were ringing. It was as though the sun and moon had turned upside down and the mountains and rivers were shaking. A horrifying sword chi that was hundreds of meters long shot out with unparalleled speed. It swept across the distance of 1,000 meters in an instant. In the eyes of the hundreds of thousands of people in Wuxia City, it was as though a white crescent moon swept across Tai Yulong and the others with a powerful gale. In an instant, Tai Yulong and the 300 royal soldiers turned into ashes. They were dead. Even Tai Yulong's astral infant could not escape in time. The sword chi was unstoppable. It soared into the sky and traveled for 10 miles, slicing off a tall mountain behind Wuxia City. The mountain rocks collapsed and shook the heavens and earth. Everyone was dumbfounded. They could not believe their eyes. Even Xiao Jinghong, Zhao Tsongjian, and the others opened their mouths wide. Their eyes were about to fall out. Jiang Shui, who was supporting Zhou Xuanji, was also stunned. This slash was too powerful. Was this something a human could do? Oh God! The heavens and earth were silent, so silent that it was terrifying. Zhou Xuanji panted and maintained his posture of swinging his sword. Big's wings flapped continuously. But, he felt a little pain on his head and a little cold. The slash just now had shaved off the hair on his head. Zhou Xuanji did not notice his beloved pet's embarrassment. He cried out proudly, "The Empress of Great Zhou is only a sister. First she killed Lady Zhao Xian and her son, then she killed me for no reason. Is this how the mother of Great Zhou should behave? What a joke. What a big joke. I, Sword God Zhou, despise such people the most." After that, he said softly to Xiao Jinghong and the others, "Let's go." Big and Small Air immediately flapped their wings and flew away. The others followed on their swords. The group flew quickly toward Great Zhou's border. After a period of silence, Wuxia City exploded. The cries of hundreds of thousands of people gathered together, as though the sky was about to be turned upside down. "Oh my God! Sword God! He's definitely the Sword God. The famous Tai Yulong died just like that. The Empress of Great Zhou is so vicious?" She dared to harm me, Sword God Zhou? Is there any justice in this world? That slash just now. Did I see it wrong? So horrifying. It's not something a human can do. It's a god. A god. Chapter 88. After a full-powered slash, Zhou Xuanji became a cripple. However, with Xiao Jinghong and Zhao Congjian in front of them, they forced their way out of the Great Border Pass and disappeared into the vast forest without a trace. The news of Sword God Zhou killing Tai Yulong and 300 royal soldiers with a single strike was like a nuclear bomb exploding. It spread like wildfire to the cities around Wuxia City. In less than 3 days, the news had spread throughout the Great Zhou dynasty. 5 days later, even the dynasties under the Great Zhou dynasty were discussing this matter. The name of Sword God Zhou was known by the whole world. Meanwhile, Zhou Xuanji and the others came to a place where demons roamed freely and humans were rarely seen. Master, doesn't this look like the place where we first met? Xiao Jinghong asked with a smile. Zhou Xuanji, who was being supported by Jiang Shui, nodded. He looked around, took a deep breath, and sighed. Although the landscape of the mountains and rivers is similar, we have all changed. Fortunately, we have not dispersed yet. Xiao Jinghong couldn't help but sigh. Thinking back to the past and looking at the present, he had more emotions than Zhao Congjian and the others. Northern Sword Valiant laughed. If I don't master dual sword wills, I won't drink any more. Huang Lianxing covered her mouth and giggled. Your wine has been taken by master. You can't drink it even if you wanted to. Zhao Congjian looked at Xiao Jinghong and said, My goal is to surpass you. Xiao Jinghong smiled and said, Then you have to work harder. Jiang Shui pointed at the mountain in front of them and said, Let's stay on the hillside in front. There's a river in the west and a boundless forest in the north. We can have anything we want. Isn't that great? Compared to the bustling dynasties, she preferred this desolate and uninhabited place. Humans were always more terrifying than demons. Zhou Xuanji said weakly, It's up to you. Help me sit down. He wailed in his heart. In the future, he could not casually accumulate power for a long period of time. Swinging the sword felt good for a moment, but afterward, his legs turned to jelly. Hearing this, everyone laughed and continued to walk towards the hillside in front of them. The hill was 100 meters tall and 300 meters wide, and there was a small cliff behind it. For Zhou Xuanji and the others, they would not fall to their deaths. Jiang Shui helped Zhou Xuanji to a rock and sat him down. Jiang Shui took out a small stove and prepared to brew some tonic for him. Wu, not far away, the Balda called out in a low voice. He and Little Fool were crouching on the ground, squeezing each other's bodies. It really seemed like they were wronged. Zhou Xuanji stared at it and scolded unpleasantly, It's just a few strands of fur, is there a need to do this? When I, your master, swing my sword, don't you know to lower your head? Ada felt even more wronged and buried his head in the grass. At this moment, the little black snake dragged the sleeping three-eyed drought rodent over with difficulty. It smiled coyly and said, Master, when will you start helping me become stronger? Ever since that slash 5 days ago, it did not even dare to call itself in front of Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji was very tired and was not in a good mood. He waved his hand and said, We'll talk about it in the future. Perform well. I'm not keeping you alive just to torture you. When the little black snake heard this, it was instantly overjoyed. It shut its mouth and didn't say anything else. It was in a good mood and felt that a beautiful future was right in front of it. In the following period of time, there were no more attacks from the Great Zhou dynasty. After all, they had already left the Great Zhou dynasty and no one knew where they were. Only after 13 days did Zhou Xuanji fully recover. The lively feeling made him even more determined to not be too reckless in the future. 2 months later. It was Zhou Xuanji's 14th birthday. Analyze that the sword owner has reached 14 years old. Gotcha started. Ding. Congratulations, the sword owner obtained silver, falcon sword, silver, magnetic sword, gold, ghost curse sword. Zhou Xuanji, who was cultivating, opened his eyes wide. 3 legendary swords? Interesting. And a gold-grade legendary sword. Did the supreme legendary sword system level up? It's getting more and more generous. Zhou Xuanji took advantage of the situation and immediately took out 3 legendary swords. At the same time, lines of words appeared before his eyes. Sword name, falcon sword grade, silver description. The sword is like a flying eagle, sharp and powerful. The cry of the eagle can intimidate the enemy and deter evil. Sword name, magnetic sword grade, silver description. It was forged with goblin magnetic iron and contains powerful suction force. Sword name, ghost curse sword grade, gold description. It was formed by thousands of evil spirits. Those who are pierced by the sword will be cursed by evil spirits. They all look good. He got 2 more legendary swords with special effects. Zhou Xuanji smiled satisfactorily and looked at the 3 legendary swords. The falcon sword was a silver sword. The hilt looked like a majestic eagle with its wings spread. The magnetic sword was an earthy gold color. Compared to the falcon sword, it looked ordinary. The ghost curse sword was just like its name. It was filled with an evil aura. The blade was black and there were 3 small ghost heads on the hilt. It looked like an evil sword at first glance. Compared to the bloodbath sword, it was even more evil. At this moment, Xiao Jinghong walked over. He glanced at the 3 legendary swords in front of Zhou Xuanji and calmly looked away. He smiled and said, "Revered teacher, it's time for me to depart. The border custom war is in a month's time. I need to retrieve my 2 beloved swords first." Zhou Xuanji stored the 3 legendary swords into the supreme storage and smiled, "Yo, you even hid your powerful treasures." Xiao Jinghong shook his head and said, "I only immersed them in molten iron deep in the mountains for 10 years. The power of the swords must have grown a lot." Zhou Xuanji nodded and waved his hand saying, "Go and bid farewell to them. I will wait here for your triumphant return." Xiao Jinghong cupped his fist with a smile and left. After a while, Xiao Jinghong left on his sword. Northern Sword Valiant walked over and squatted beside Zhou Xuanji. "Master, is the young master really at ease this time?" he asked. Xiao Jinghong was Zhou Xuanji's disciple. Northern Sword Valiant, Zhao Tsongjian, and Huang Lianxin all addressed him as their young master. Of course, this address was arranged by Zhou Xuanji. Everyone had their own theories. Zhou Xuanji closed his eyes to cultivate and said casually, "He's not a child. He's not going to brave mountains of blades or seas of fire. He's going to fight for fame." Northern Sword Valiant felt that it made sense, so he did not disturb Zhou Xuanji anymore. After internalizing qi for 2 hours, Zhou Xuanji got up and took out his new legendary swords to practice a set of sword techniques. Once the ghost curse sword was drawn, it was filled with an evil aura, which attracted the attention of others. Zhou Xuanji held the sword and swung it. It was as though countless evil spirits were surrounding him, which was even more terrifying than Qin Qitsuan. "Master really has all kinds of swords," Zhao Tsongjian said enviously. Although he wanted to learn the 10,000 sword dragon incantation, the dual sword wills gave him a headache. He decided to give up in the end. Zhou Xuanji was right. Everyone's way of the sword is destined. It can't be forced. Only the sword that suits you is the best. Huang Lianxin, who was feeding the little black snake, looked up and said, "It might have been left behind by Lady Zhao Xian, master." As the most favored imperial concubine of Great Zhou, it was not impossible for Lady Zhao Xian to have collected many famous swords. The little black snake spat its forked tongue and sighed, "Ghost sword. This is bad. If we are discovered by the ghost gate, it will be another disaster." Zhou Xuanji had already agreed to help it grow stronger. What it ate now were all natural treasures and elixirs. All of them were great nourishment. "What is the ghost gate?" Huang Lianxin asked curiously. "Isn't this the lowest grade of God's sword?" He immediately took out the book cutter sword. 3 lines of words appeared before his eyes. Sword name, book cutter sword grade, common or description. When a scholar was reading a book, he realized that the most important page was missing. In a fit of rage, he slashed the book with his sword. What a lousy sword. For the first time, Zhou Xuanji had the urge to throw his sword away. He had been looking forward to it for so long. Looking at the book cutter sword in his hand, he threw it to the ground. Is this a godly sword? It was obviously a dagger. Jiang Shui, who was at the side, couldn't help but open her eyes when she heard a clang. When she saw the book cutter sword, she realized that it was an unfamiliar sword. She glared at Zhou Xuanji and said, "That was left to you by your mother. How can you throw it away like this?" Zhou Xuanji smiled bitterly. He could only pick up the book cutter sword and silently store it in the supreme storage. After that, he inherited the memory of the 6-path sword shadow. 6-path sword shadow had the profoundness of cloning. It created 6 clones with sword chi and it was a powerful attack. According to Zhou Xuanji's estimation, 6-path sword shadow was at least an earth-grade advanced tier sword technique. Impressive. The vastness of this memory was second only to the 10,000 sword dragon incantation. After he finished inheriting the memory of the sword technique, he took out the swine-culling sword straight away and began to practice. Seeing that Zhou Xuanji began to practice, Beishao Wangjian, Zhao Tsongjian, and Huang Lianxin were all surprised. Zhou Xuanji did not usually practice the sword, but once he did, it must be a new sword technique. 6-path sword shadow's moves were tricky, and it was divided into 6 positions. After he practiced 100 times, 3 afterimages appeared around him, which made Zhao Congjian and the other two's eyes brighten up. It was a new sword technique indeed. After 300 times he mastered 6-path sword shadow. Zhou Xuanji had 6 sword shadow clones around him, which were exactly the same as him. It was as though he was practicing sword techniques with 7 clones. It was a majestic sight. Zhao Congjian trembled in excitement. He clenched his fists and mumbled, "I want to learn. I want to learn." Beishao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin were mesmerized by the sight. If they could learn such a sword technique, it would definitely increase their power tremendously. After 500 times, 6-path sword shadow produced a sword will. Each sword shadow was imbued with a sword will, which was like 6 legendary swords. They were extremely powerful. Zhou Xuanji leaped up and flew away with the 6-path sword shadow. He charged straight into the forest and knocked down the trees one after another. A cloud of dust was swept up as he rampaged for 500 meters. Beishao Wangjian gritted his teeth and looked back, mumbling, "I can't watch anymore. There are too many sword techniques I want to learn." Huang Lianxin was the same. She could only sigh. Her master's talent was really enviable. The little black snake who was drinking soup shook its head and said, "I only have one word for you. I'm convinced." After that, it lowered its head and drank the soup happily. Now it was untied from the 3-eyed drought rodent because it was already half a meter long. At this rate, it would grow into a giant python sooner or later, and eventually transform into the infamous hegemon-scaled black dragon. In the blink of an eye, another month passed. Jiang Shui successfully broke through to the enlightening stage, and Huang Lianxin began to break through too. What was most worth celebrating was that Zhao Congjian broke through to the Soul Fountain stage. This guy challenged Zhou Xuanji in high spirits, but he was defeated by 6-path sword shadow. He shut himself out. He continued to train hard. 3 days later, Zhou Xuanji found him and asked him to go to the Great Zhou Empire to take a look. Xiao Jinghong and Meng Tianlong's battle should have ended, but he had not returned yet. He might have encountered some trouble. Zhao Congjian nodded and left immediately. After that, Zhou Xuanji walked up to Beishao Wangjian and scolded him for being a jinx. Beishao Wangjian was embarrassed. He could only scratch his head and force a smile. 10 days later, Zhao Congjian came back with a solemn face. The group gathered and asked Xiao Jinghong what happened. "The Meng clan is too much," Zhao Congjian said furiously. Meng Tianlang could not defeat Xiao Jinghong, and a powerful cultivator from the Meng clan captured Xiao Jinghong. This has caused a huge commotion. Many people in Great Zhou are condemning the Meng clan. Even the Great Zhou's royal court is talking about this, but Emperor Yan of Zhou did not take it to heart. Zhou Xuanji heard him and his face turned cold immediately. Jiang Shui frowned and said, "Is there no royal law in Great Zhou?" Zhao Congjian said softly, "I heard that Zhou Yalong is supporting the Meng clan." Zhou Yalong, the top prodigy of Great Zhou. The person who was most likely to become the next emperor of Great Zhou. Huang Lianxin looked at Zhou Xuanji and asked, "Master, what should we do?" Zhou Xuanji's eyes were flashing with a murderous intent. Flatten the Meng clan and save him. The Meng clan is in the Great Zhou royal city. Are we really going there? This is definitely a trap. Beishao Wangjian reminded. The first person who recognized Zhou Xuanji was Meng Changhu from the Meng clan. The Meng clan was definitely the empress lackey. Zhou Xuanji said, "So what? No matter who it is, I have to save my disciple." Chapter 90. Seeing that Zhou Xuanji was about to act rashly, Zhao Congjian quickly said, "Master, we need to plan this at length. At least before you appear, Xiao Jinghong will be fine." He saw Xiao Jinghong as a competitor and did not wish for Xiao Jinghong to die. Zhou Xuanji frowned and said, "What can we do? We can only sneak into the royal capital and wait for an opportunity." Huang Lianxin suggested, "Brother Zhao, why don't you go and find out more information? Xiao Jinghong is not an ordinary person. Since he was captured by the Meng clan, the Great Zhou Empire will definitely do something. Perhaps Emperor Yan of Zhou has already acted?" The others nodded and felt that this matter couldn't be rushed. Zhou Xuanji was not overwhelmed by anger either. He muttered, "Song Jian, you go first. You must keep a low profile and don't expose your identity." Within Great Zhou, who did not know that Zhao Congjian had become Sword God Zhou's sword slave. The henchmen of the Great Zhou Empress must have been searching for Zhao Congjian's whereabouts. Zhao Congjian nodded and left immediately. After Beishao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin bowed, they left to continue practicing their swordsmanship. They understood that at this moment, Zhou Xuanji needed to remain calm. Moreover, they did not know more about the great Zhou Empire than Zhou Xuanji. Jiang Shui held Zhou Xuanji's hand and comforted him. If you really want to go to Great Zhou's royal city, I will go with you. We can disguise ourselves. Recently, I have learned Qin Chitsuan's disguising technique, and I can guarantee that even the gods and immortals will not be able to recognize us. Zhou Xuanji laughed unpleasantly and said, You said I was boasting, but you like to boast too? Jiang Shui saw him smile, so she giggled and said, I learned how to brag from you. Zhou Xuanji patted the back of her hand and said with a smile, Don't worry, I won't do anything reckless. As he looked at Jiang Shui, Zhou Xuanji suddenly realized that he was as tall as her. Unknowingly, he actually did not notice this matter. He took a deep breath and said, In recent years my state of mind has not been good, and I have neglected the people around me. Jiang Shui heard him and felt a little sour in her heart, but she did not show it. She stretched out her hand and patted Zhou Xuanji's head. Xuanji, you've grown up, she said with a smile. A man's ambition is to travel far and wide. You're already doing very well. Zhou Xuanji looked back at the top of the hill and said, It's been a long time since we watched the sunset together. Shall we? Jiang Shui wrapped her arms around his neck and smiled. You said it yourself. You're delaying my training. Zhou Xuanji said indifferently, It's fine to train a little less. Moreover, you don't have to work so hard. I'll take care of you and protect you in the future. Jiang Shui smiled sweetly and did not reply. She sighed in her heart, I don't want to be your burden. Its tongue flicked in and out, which made everyone shudder. Zhao Congjian said, No matter what, Xiao Jinghong is temporarily out of danger. Everyone knows that Emperor Yan of Zhou cherishes talents. With Xiao Jinghong's talent, Emperor Yan of Zhou might take a liking to him. Zhou Xuanji rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought. He did not want to go to Great Zhou to become the emperor. He only wanted to kill the empress and leave Great Zhou. Now that Xiao Jinghong was captured, his plan was completely messed up. If an empire has a monarchical violet qi, it can rise up powerfully, and its fate will last for thousands of years. But if there are two monarchical violet qi, the empire might be destroyed. At this moment, an old voice came. Everyone turned around and saw a silhouette standing at the top of the hill. He had a hunched back and was holding a walking stick. His white hair was tied behind his head, and his eyes were squinted. There were many yellow spots on his face, and he was dressed like an old man in the countryside. Zhao Congjian drew his sword and asked with a deep voice, Who are you? The old man ignored him and looked at Zhou Xuanji with a smile. Zhou Yalong was born with monarchical violet qi and was nurtured by Emperor Yan of Zhou as the heir to the throne. After that, Zhou Yalong became a powerful cultivator. I did not expect you to be born at this time. You also have monarchical violet qi, which put the current emperor in a difficult position. Monarchical violet qi? Zhou Xuanji frowned. What's that? He suddenly remembered that the race in his attribute list was not human but Great Zhou's royal bloodline. The old man walked down the hill slowly. As he walked, he said casually, If it were 500 years earlier, Emperor Yan of Zhou might have made arrangements for the two of you. But now, only one of you can live, and it must be before he ascends. This is your destiny with Zhou Yalong. Zhou Xuanji raised his hands slightly, and the Hell King sword and Thunderclap sword appeared in his hands. He asked with squinted eyes, If you don't tell us who you are, don't blame us for being impolite. This person appeared nearby without anyone noticing and even said these words. He did not come with good intentions. Zhou Xuanji took a deep breath and asked, What's the use of monarchical violet qi? It's useless. It's just a type of fate. He's only suitable to be an emperor. His luck is far thicker than normal people's. When two emperors' purple qi collide, only one can survive. When you see Zhou Yalong you will understand. Daoya old man chuckled and looked at Jiang Shui meaningfully. Jiang Shui blushed and quickly lowered her head. Facing Zhou Xuanji's grand teacher, she was very nervous, shy, and perturbed. She had an indescribable complex feeling. Marriage bestowed by the heavens. Not bad, not bad. Daoya old man laughed and Jiang Shui raised her head in surprise. Zhou Xuanji curled his lip. He suddenly felt that Daoya old man might have been talking nonsense. However, he also felt that Daoya old man meant no harm. Cultivate well. I will go to the Great Zhou Royal Palace on your behalf. No one can help you in your fated battle with Zhou Yalong. Daoya old man looked at Zhou Xuanji and nodded with a smile. His tone was filled with encouragement. After that, he disappeared on the spot. Huang Lianxin sighed in amazement. He's really an old immortal. Beixiao Wangjian curled his lip and said, Since he's Master's grand teacher, why doesn't he help Master? Zhao Tsongjin glanced at him and said, "It's not that he doesn't want to help. He has already helped a lot. But a powerful cultivator can only rely on himself. Master doesn't want him to help either." Zhou Xuanji looked calm and nodded slightly. "What the? Who doesn't want him to help?" Shortly after, he waved his hand and said, "Continue your cultivation. We will surely go to the great Zhou royal city. Whether it's the will of the heavens or not, a life for a life. The Empress of Great Zhou must die." His tone was resolute. In his opinion, if he killed the Empress of the Great Zhou, it was her fate. The group nodded and dispersed. Zhou Xuanji walked up the hill and sat facing the sun to internalize qi. Inner pellet was far from enough. Zhou Yalong had lived for hundreds of years. His cultivation had already surpassed the astral infant stage. He must become more powerful. The little black snake came to his back. It raised its body and looked afar. "I have lived for more than 1,000 years. Let me give you a piece of advice," it said. Smack, Zhou Xuanji slapped it down the cliff. "Trying to act cool in front of me?" The little black snake fell 100 meters and smashed into the rocks. "You let me finish?" it wailed. It cursed in its heart and even felt wronged. "Can't you give me some dignity? I was a 5th-rank demon king after all. What will of the heavens? I only believe that man can conquer nature." Zhou Xuanji snorted. There was something else that he said in his heart. "It's not like I haven't died before. I was mediocre in my previous life, but in this life, I will be more glorious than the heavens." Time always passed very quickly during cultivation. A month later, Daoya old man returned. However, he did not bring Xiao Jinghong back. Zhou Xuanji walked down the mountain and came up to him. "What did you do?" he asked. Daoya old man chuckled. "I brought your disciple back." "Where's my disciple?" "I, your grand teacher, failed. Can't you tell?" "Then why are you smiling so confidently?" "He's not my disciple. Why should I cry?" Zhou Xuanji sighed. In his memory, Lady Zhao Xian was gentle and virtuous. How did she endure Daoya old man? Daoya old man smiled. "Grand disciple, let me tell you a piece of good news." Zhou Xuanji asked expressionlessly, "Speak." Daoya old man smiled proudly. "Your grand teacher has great influence. I was so angry that Emperor Yan of Zhou gave Xiao Jinghong to the Sword Monarch. If you want to find Xiao Jinghong, ask the Sword Monarch for him." "Grand teacher, can I hammer you to death?" Zhou Xuanji asked with a smile. He almost took out the chicken-slaying sword. "Forget it." Now, other than Zhou Yalong and the Empress, his opponents were the Sword Monarch. Daoya old man rubbed Zhou Xuanji's head and said, "I have another piece of good news." Zhou Xuanji flipped his right hand, and the chicken-slaying sword appeared in his hand. The tip of the sword pointed downward involuntarily. "On the way back, I went to look for the Sword Monarch. He's still very influential. The Sword Monarch was so angry that he said that if you want Xiao Jinghong, you must defeat him personally." Daoya old man said with a smile. As he spoke, he twisted his waist backward and dodged the chicken-slaying sword by a hair's breadth. Jiang Shui, Zhao Tsongjian, and the others stood nearby and listened in silence. They thought that Daoya old man's arrival could turn the tables, but he pushed them into the abyss instead. Maybe this is what Zhou Xuanji always talks about as a useless teammate. Jiang Shui mumbled. Zhao Tsongjian and the others nodded and did not know what to say. Daoya old man squatted down and pinched the chicken-slaying sword's blade with his right thumb and index finger. "I have another piece of good news," he chuckled. The Hell King sword appeared in Zhou Xuanji's left hand. He activated Hell King possession straight away. Daoya old man did not panic at all. "Have you heard of the 9 emperors of the Sword's Way? Even the Sword Monarch was worlds apart from them. I have the inheritance of one of the emperors. How about I give it to you?" Chapter 92. 9 Emperors of the Way of the Sword? Zhou Xuanji deactivated the Hell King's possession and looked curious. He and Jiang Shui had heard Qiu Bailey mention the 9 Emperors of the Way of the Sword. Since ancient times, they were the 9 strongest sword emperors in the Sword Dao. They were legends in the hearts of countless sword cultivators. Zhao Tsongjian, Beishao Wangjian, and Huang Lianxin had also heard of the legend of the 9 Emperors of the Way of the Sword. What do you think? It was good news, right? Do you want it? Daoya old man asked with a smile, like an old man trying to trick a little girl. Zhao Tsongjian said in disdain, "My master, shut up." Zhou Xuanji turned around and stared at him. Zhao Tsongjian felt wronged and could only remain silent. Zhou Xuanji looked at Daoya old man and asked, "Where is the inheritance?" At the same time, he asked the sword spirit in his heart if he could accept the Sword Emperor's inheritance. "Of course you can." As long as it's about the sword Dao, Sword Master can become stronger without any worries. The Supreme Legendary Sword System will help Sword Master continue on his path. The Sword Spirit replied quickly, which made Zhou Xuanji very satisfied. He was afraid that the system would place too many restrictions on him. However, the Supreme Legendary Sword System was not bad. It was very open-ended and it only had one rule. He could only walk the path of the sword. Daoya Old Man flipped his right hand, and a small golden sword appeared in his palm. Send your divine sense into it and you can start the inheritance test. You only have one chance. If you don't pass the test, the sword will turn into dust. So you have to be prepared. Hearing Daoya Old Man's reminder, Zhou Xuanji took the sword. The others gathered around and looked at the small golden sword curiously. Daoya Old Man turned around, waved his hand and said with a smile, "I'm leaving. Grand Disciple, I'll wait for you to defeat the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou and become famous in the northern wilderness region. Don't worry about me, I'm living a carefree life." He walked elegantly, like an immortal traveling the mortal world. However, he did not receive a reply. Zhou Xuanji and the others focused their attention on the small golden sword. After walking for 100 meters he looked back. Sigh. He sighed and disappeared on the spot. "Thank you." Zhou Xuanji looked up and said softly, looking at where he had left. Zhao Tsongjian could not help but ask, "Master, are you really going to inherit the legacy of the ancient sword emperors? With your talent, you will definitely be in existence on the same level as the 9 emperors of the Way of the Sword in 1,000 years." Zhou Xuanji looked up at him and sighed. "From the sword, bend over." Zhou Xuanji said softly. Zhao Tsongjian was confused, but he still lowered his head obediently. Jiang Shui, Beishao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin were all curious. No matter how bad the 9 emperors of the Way of the Sword were, they should at least have heaven-grade sword techniques, right? The first test is to fight someone of a higher level. Your cultivation is at the 2nd level of the inner Dan stage. You need to defeat a soul swordsman at the 2nd level of the Spirit Spring stage. Do you dare to accept? Wang Xiaofei asked, and Zhou Xuanji replied without hesitation, "Come." Then, a black shadow of a swordsman appeared in front of him. He was 1.8 meters tall and was far less intimidating than Wang Xiaofei's shadow. Zhou Xuanji took out the thunderclap sword and used the 8-step sword lunge, coming up to the soul swordsman. 6 afterimages appeared around Zhou Xuanji. It was the 6-path sword shadow body. Zhou Xuanji stabbed toward the soul swordsman, and so did the 6-path sword shadow. Boom. The soul swordsman perished. Before it could even attack, it was defeated by Zhou Xuanji in an instant. Zhou Xuanji had cultivated the Sword Qi Golden Body incantation to the 3rd level, Sword Qi Soar. Both his physical strength and Sword Qi were powerful. Together with the gold-grade legendary swords, how could a Soul Fountain level 2 not be destroyed? The second test is a Soul Swordsman at the 5th level of the Spirit Spring stage. Do you dare to accept? Wang Xiaofei continued to ask. His tone was emotionless as though he was unconscious. Fight. Just when Zhou Xuanji spoke, the Soul Swordsman appeared. He waved his right hand and numerous legendary swords appeared above his head. He charged at the Soul Swordsman with the 10 swords mode. 10 legendary swords flew toward the Soul Swordsman like bolts of lightning. The Soul Swordsman swung its sword to block, but it could not withstand the impact of 10 legendary swords. It immediately jumped away. Swoosh! The Ghost Curse sword pierced through the Soul Swordsman with the ranged sword propelling. It was destroyed again. Zhou Xuanji frowned and mumbled, "Too weak. It's like fighting a robot." If the Soul Swordsman was a real person he would be even more powerful. The third test. Within 3 days, cultivate an Earth-grade low-tier sword technique to small accomplishment. Wang Xiaofei's voice came again. Next, an ancient book appeared in front of Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji stored his swords and flipped through the ancient book. He memorized all the sword moves and threw the book aside. He was extremely confident. Moonlight Wind Sword Dance. He took out the book cutter sword and began practicing. There were a total of 108 sword moves. He used 10 breaths time to complete 1 round, which was extremely fast. After all, he had already mastered many sword techniques. Many of the sword moves were similar, so it was easy for him to use them. After 100 rounds, the Moonlight Wind Sword Dance reached small accomplishment. After 300 rounds, the Moonlight Wind Sword Dance reached great accomplishment. After 500 rounds, the Moonlight Wind Sword Dance reached Sword Will. Zhou Xuanji stored his swords. He was a little dissatisfied and shook his head, saying, "An hour is still too slow." He looked at Wang Xiaofei and prepared for the next test. However, the sky-sundering sword emperor Wang Xiaofei, did not continue with the next test. A long while later. Brat, you are King cheating? Wang Xiaofei cursed suddenly, which stunned Zhou Xuanji. Ugh, this thing has consciousness. When you get out, the emperor's sword will appear in your hand. Alright, the inheritance is over. Wang Xiaofei's tone became cold again. Zhou Xuanji blinked and asked curiously, I really want to know, are you dead or alive? Wang Xiaofei waved his hand and next, Zhou Xuanji felt everything around him shatter. As if he had awoken from a dream, he opened his eyes and saw Jiang Shui's face, causing him to tremble in fear. He called out, What are you doing? Zhao Congjian, Beishao Wangjian and Huang Lianxin turned around. Jiang Shui was also frightened. She clutched her chest and curled her lips. Just look at you. Is there a need to be so exaggerated? Zhou Xuanji rolled his eyes. Getting so close would scare him to death. Zhao Congjian quickly asked, So fast? Did master fail? Zhou Xuanji stared at him and said, Are you looking down on me, your master? He told them about the process of the test, and everyone sighed in amazement. Dozens of stages? What a scam. Beishao Wangjian asked curiously, Master, where's the emperor's sword? Take it out and let us see. Oh yeah. Where's the emperor's sword? Zhou Xuanji looked down and saw that the small golden sword in his hand was not the emperor's sword. That old man lied to me? Zhou Xuanji frowned. At this moment, the small golden sword suddenly exploded into countless golden specks of light. The specks of light quickly formed into a giant sword that was 1.5 meters long. The sword was entirely golden, and its blade was 30 centimeters wide. 2 golden dragons coiled around the hilt, which looked extremely majestic. So this is the emperor's sword? It weighs 5,000 kilograms. Zhou Xuanji mumbled to himself. If not for his powerful body, he might have been smashed into meat paste. When the others heard this, they all reached out and shook hands. Jiang Shui and Huang Lianxin could not even lift it up. Zhao Congjian had it easy, but Beishao Wangjian was struggling. Sword spirit, what grade is this sword? Zhou Xuanji asked curiously in his heart. The emperor's sword of the sky sundering sword emperor should be more than gold grade, right? The sword spirit needs to examine it. Do you want to keep it in the supreme legendary sword system? Keep it. As Zhou Xuanji spoke, the emperor's sword disappeared. Zhao Congjian curled his lip and said, This inheritance is a little shabby. It seems like the 9 emperors of the sword's way are nothing more than this. Huang Lianxin guessed, maybe the period when he established the inheritance was not when he was at his peak, or maybe he just wanted to help his descendants and not really let someone inherit his legacy. The little black snake came over and said disdainfully, A man who is never content is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. 2 earth-grade sword techniques and a sword emperor's sword, what else do you want? Beishao Wangjian said, Lianxin, let's starve it for 7 days? Huang Lianxin nodded, okay. The little black snake became anxious. Aren't you too stingy? Great Zhou's royal city in an ancient-looking inn. A storyteller stood at the center of the first floor, surrounded by close to 100 people. He waved his folding fan and said with his eyes wide open, facing the threat of Tai Yulong and the other royal soldiers, Sword God Zhou slashed with his sword. The sword's radiance illuminated the heavens and the earth. That scene could not be described with words. Hundreds of thousands of people in Wuxia City sighed in admiration. A sword of a god. I heard that Sword God Zhou killed Tai Yulong and the others in an instant. He even slashed down a mountain and almost sank Wuxia City. The audience cried out in astonishment. Their faces were filled with admiration. At this moment, a voice came from the corner of the inn. Mister, who do you think is more powerful, Sword God Zhou or the Sword Monarch? The storyteller stroked his goatee and pretended to be profound. Actually, Sword God Zhou and the Sword Monarch had a battle before. With this, everyone opened their eyes wide. Are you serious? How come I have never heard of it? A muscular man held a bowl of wine and questioned. The storyteller said with a smile, It's true. I saw it with my own eyes. They fought to a draw and admired each other. The Sword Monarch said that once Sword God Zhou appears in the world, he will be famous. As expected, Sword God Zhou became the first person on the reputation ranking of Great Zhou this year. Even the sword noble Xiao Jinghong said that he was Sword God Zhou's disciple. The unparalleled Sword God Zhou, he truly lives up to his name. The crowd clapped and cheered as they listened to Sword God Zhou's stories. They all felt excited as if they were Sword God Zhou themselves. Nonsense. Sword God Zhou is still far from the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou. He can't even be compared to the Sword Monarch's disciple. The voice came from the corner of the inn again. It was full of disdain. This time he incurred the wrath of the crowd. Everyone turned to look, but in the next moment their expressions changed. They all knelt down and did not dare to look at that person again. The storyteller was also shocked. He quickly knelt down and said with a trembling voice, "Your Highness." The person who spoke was the crown prince of the great Zhou Empire, Zhou Tianyu. Zhou Tianyu looked like he was in his early 30s. He had a dignified face and a calm temperament. He wore a white shirt. The innkeeper was also shocked. He quickly ran over and asked with a stutter, "Your Highness, why are you here?" Zhou Tianyu drank a bowl of wine and said expressionlessly, "I passed by this inn and heard that someone was praising sword god Zhou and belittling the sword monarch. So I came in to take a look." After that he got up and walked towards the side door of the inn. When he reached the door he suddenly stopped. With his back facing everyone in the inn he said, "Sword god Zhou can't even protect his own disciple. He's not a hero. If he dares to challenge the sword monarch, I, Zhou Tianyu, am willing to take him as my teacher and let him be the crown prince's teacher. You can spread the word." I don't think he dares to. Chapter 94. The crown prince of Great Zhou challenged sword god Zhou in public. He claimed that if sword god Zhou dared to challenge the sword monarch of Great Zhou, he would become sword god Zhou's disciple. He did not say that sword god Zhou had to win the challenge, but as long as he dared to challenge. This matter shook the Great Zhou dynasty. In just a few days, it spread to all the dynasties under the Great Zhou dynasty. Many people thought that Zhou Tianyu was too high profile. Sword god Zhou might not be as powerful as the sword monarch of Great Zhou, but he still had the courage to challenge the sword monarch. After all, Zhou Yalong is going to replace him, so he couldn't help but come out and cause trouble. What a joke. Who has sword god Zhou been afraid of? He even dared to go against the Empress of Great Zhou. Why would he be afraid of the sword monarch? Has the Great Zhou crown prince suffered a chi deviation? Clown? No wonder the Emperor of Great Zhou doesn't think highly of him. Almost everyone thought that Zhou Tianyu was playing to the gallery. Now, sword god Zhou was no longer the person who had just become famous. His battle achievements had pushed his reputation to the peak. Among the sword cultivators of Great Zhou, only the sword monarch of Great Zhou could suppress them. Sword god Zhou was an upright person and he loved to help others. He was more reputable than Great Zhou's crown prince. After learning about the reaction of the outside world, Zhou Tianyu was so angry that he smashed the table and flew into a rage in his own house. This incident also made the world understand sword god Zhou's reputation. Unknowingly, sword god Zhou had become an unparalleled powerful cultivator in their hearts. Take me as your master? With his aptitude? I'm not interested. Zhou Xuanji snorted. Zhao Tsongjin was standing in front of him. Every 3 months, Zhao Tsongjin would go to the Zhou dynasty to find out about Xiao. This time, after hearing about Zhou Tianyu's provocation, he immediately came back to report. Zhao Tsongjin smiled. If Zhou Tianyu knew that you are his younger brother, what would he think? Zhou Xuanji said disdainfully, I don't have an elder brother like him. The other princes were all thinking of ways to win the hearts of the people, but this guy only knew how to talk. For example, Zhou Qingxin was not talented, but he worked hard. Then Zhao Tsongjian passed on the news to the others. Jiang Shui pursed her lips. If he didn't provoke Xuanji, the world wouldn't know that the great Zhou dynasty has a crown prince. Northern Sword Valiant had a look of disdain, frog at the bottom of the well. Huang Lianxin smiled. Brother Zhou Yalong is only SOSO. The little black snake laughed. Ha! I admire him. Thus, the little black snake was starved for another 7 days. Time passed. After another 3 months, Zhou Xuanji broke through to inner pellet level 3. Jiang Shui was stunned. She opened her eyes wide, and she felt as though she was electrocuted. Zhou Xuanji smiled proudly and brushed past her. You dare to flirt with me? You are still far from it. He smiled and prepared to go down the mountain. At this moment, Jiang Shui pulled his hand. He turned around instinctively and Jiang Shui dashed up to him. Just like before, she pecked him lightly on the lips and ran away quickly. Zhou Xuanji was stunned. Looking at her back as she ran away, his heart beat faster. What the hell? Is this the feeling of falling in love? Oh no, I was flirted with again. Zhou Xuanji was stunned on the spot and laughed foolishly. At the foot of the mountain, the little black snake, which was coiled on a giant rock, lowered its head. Could not bear to watch any more. I have never seen such a shameless adulterer and adulterer. In broad daylight. Sigh. It heaved a long sigh and could not help but think of the female demons in its cave. Looking back, it had mixed feelings. Zhao Congjian and Beixiao Wangjian were both training their sword techniques and did not notice the commotion on the mountain. Huang Lianxin noticed them and she covered her mouth and giggled. A big and small air were sleeping soundly next to each other. The sun set and the moon rose. Zhou Xuanji returned to his house and prepared to rest. Every night he would internalize qi in his house. He would first tell Jiang Shui a story, then sleep for a while. He would wake up when the sky was just brightening to absorb the violet qi from the east. Xuanji, what story are you telling me tonight? Jiang Shui sat on the wooden bed and asked as she combed her hair. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow and said, I'll tell you a love story. Jiang Shui heard him and her eyes brightened immediately. Tell me quickly. She cried out immediately. Zhou Xuanji sat beside her and said casually, Kiss me and I will tell you. Jiang Shui blushed and pouted coquettishly, What's there to kiss? When I was young I kissed you every day. Didn't you think my saliva was dirty? Zhou Xuanji said righteously, That was in the past. Now, so fragrant. Jiang Shui felt sweet in her heart. She raised her chin and snorted, I'm not going to kiss you. If you don't kiss me I won't tell you. Fine, I won't tell you. Please kiss me. Call me sister. Sister. Good boy. Come, put your face closer. Chapter 95. Early in the morning, the first ray of sunlight swept over from the horizon, streaking across the mountains and rivers. On top of a mountain, a black bull with a shoulder height of 15 meters was gazing into the distance. Its four limbs were muscular and the black fur on its body was like steel needles. Its horns were like curved blades and its eyes were cold and fierce. Standing on top of the mountain, it felt like a king. Tens of thousands of demon soldiers were crawling at the foot of the mountain. Most of them had already transformed and were waiting for the Black Yak's orders. Children, do you remember our goal? The Black Yak suddenly opened his mouth. His domineering voice reverberated throughout the mountains. Kill Sword God Zhou. Tens of thousands of demon soldiers roared in unison, scaring away the birds in the surrounding forest. The Black Yak twisted its body and stood upright, transforming into its human form. Well, a black cloak appeared out of thin air and he quickly put it on. He had the head of a bull and the body of a human. His skin was dark and his face was wild. A terrifying blade that was 30 meters long appeared in his hand. The saber looked very exaggerated and oppressive. He raised his blade and roared furiously, My children, Sword God Zhou is hiding within a radius of 1,000 miles. Find him and inform me. Yes. Tens of thousands of demon soldiers shouted in unison, all of them quickly leaving. In less than 5 breaths of time, there was not a single demon soldier left at the foot of the mountain. The black bull laughed coldly, Sword God Zhou? I would like to see if you are really that strong. I will chop off your head. The Gulan demon emperor wants your head. After that, he laughed wildly as though he had already obtained Sword God Zhou's head. Zhou Xuanji was sunbathing on the slope with his hands under his head, looking quite relaxed. At the foot of the mountain, Zhao Congjian was teaching Beixiao Wangjian. Jiang Shui was practicing her spells while Huang Lianxin was practicing her swordsmanship. The little black snake was being bullied by a big and small air. It was like a whip being tossed around, screaming miserably. The three-eyed drought rodent squeaked on Ah Big's head. The Emperor's sword's grade has been detected. The sword spirit's voice suddenly resounded in Zhou Xuanji's mind. Next, 3 lines of words appeared before his eyes. Sword name, Sky-Sundering Emperor's Sword. Grade, Amethyst. Description, contains a sword soul and is forged from 5,000 kilograms of dark steel. It is indestructible and when swung the strength of the slash will be doubled. It possesses a special ability, the power of the ancient sword emperor. Can only be used once a year and there are no side effects. The power of the ancient sword emperor? Once a year? Zhou Xuanji blinked and inwardly asked, How powerful is the power of the ancient sword emperor? He was in a wonderful mood. He did not expect that the first amethyst god sword would not be from the Supreme Legendary Sword System's lottery. 10,000 kilograms of Shen iron doubled his strength. To a Dharma cultivator this was a devastating blow. It depends on the strength of the sword master. With every level he ascends, he'll be able to unleash more of the power of the ancient sword monarch, reaching the Mahayana realm at the very most. The sword spirit replied, which made Zhou Xuanji open his eyes wide. Mahayana realm. That was an existence that was about to ascend. He immediately became excited and took out the Sky-Sundering Emperor sword. This golden dragon sword was so mighty that 5,000 kilograms of weight was nothing to Zhou Xuanji. He held the Sky-Sundering Emperor sword in one hand and performed the moonlit wind sword dance. The giant sword danced with a domineering aura that could split mountains and rivers. At the foot of the mountain, Jiang Shui and the other three could not help but raise their eyebrows. Zhao Congjian's eyes lit up and he mumbled, "How domineering. I really want to learn." No. There were too many sword techniques he wanted to learn. Zhao Congjian held back his excitement and turned around. Beixiao Wangjian was also envious, but it was a pity that they did not have Zhou Xuanji's talent. They needed at least a few months to learn a set of sword techniques, and it would take years for them to reach black grade. After practicing the moonlit wind sword dance, Zhou Xuanji's hands were itching. He immediately gathered everyone and told them that he was going to a stronghold to train. He tried to come back at night. No one had any objections. Although Zhou Xuanji was only at inner pellet level 3, he was the most powerful among them. He left on the windcutter sword and quickly disappeared into the horizon. Outside the border of Great Zhou, there were many criminals, evil cultivators, and tyrants who established strongholds or sections. There were countless of them. Zhao Congjian, a big and small heir, discovered many of them. When Zhou Xuanji brought little Jiang Shui out to play occasionally, he saw traces of bandits. They flew for about 100 miles. Zhou Xuanji stopped suddenly and looked in the direction he was looking. In front of him was a barren land with few trees. The terrain was uneven. A majestic silhouette sat on a small hill. It was a bull demon in human form. He was extremely domineering, especially the horrifying broadsword beside him. Even though he was 1,000 meters away, Zhou Xuanji could not help but shudder in fear. Undefeatable. Could this demon be a 6th rank or even a 7th rank Great Demon King? Just as he was thinking, the bull demon's voice came, "Young man, come here. I have something to ask you. If you don't come, I will cut you down with my broadsword." Zhou Xuanji curled his lip and flew over immediately. He could use this demon to test the power of the sky-sundering Emperor Sword. Soon he came up to the bull demon. The bull demon stared at him with eyes that were as big as bronze bells and shouted, "I am Zhangyo Dark Emperor. Have you heard of my name? In Great Zhou's territory, my name is used to scare kids like you." Zhou Xuanji stood on the windcutter sword and pretended to be terrified. "Great King. What are you going to do?" Zhangyo Dark Emperor was satisfied. Zhou Xuanji's chi obscuring incantation was like nothing in front of him. He had already seen through Zhou Xuanji's cultivation, but he did not take it to heart. An inner pellet realm cultivator was still an ant to him. And it could not be Sword God Zhou. Too weak. "Do you know where Sword God Zhou is?" Zhangyo Dark Emperor asked with a deep voice, staring at Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji looked as though he was about to cry. He replied with a trembling voice, "No? Why are you looking for him?" Zhangyo Dark Emperor snorted coldly, "To kill him, of course. I heard that Sword God Zhou is short, but his sword technique is one of the best in Great Zhou. It's a pity that there's a powerhouse in the demon race who wants his head." Zhou Xuanji looked terrified, but he was thinking in his heart, "A powerhouse in the demon race? Could it be the Gulan demon monarch?" Other than that, he could not think of any other powerhouse in the demon race. "Young man, don't be afraid. Back then, I had a master as big as you. Do you know what happened to him?" Zhangyo Dark Emperor laughed, but the broadsword in his hand never fell. "You ate him?" Zhou Xuanji asked carefully. "How did you know?" Zhangyo Dark Emperor was shocked. He always used this story to scare people, but this time, Zhou Xuanji guessed it in advance. This made him very unhappy. "Be good. Kneel down. I will cut you down with my broadsword and let you die without pain." Zhangyo Dark Emperor waved his hand at Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji's skin was soft and tender, so he must taste good. Zhou Xuanji's face turned pale. He stuttered, "My king? Why do you want to eat me?" "I have already told you the truth," Zhangyo Dark Emperor laughed proudly. "So what? I'm going to cut you down. Hurry up and kneel down. If you dare to escape, I will make your life worse than death." Zhou Xuanji laughed coldly in his heart. "Stupid bull, I am going to kill you." "Stop." At this moment, a loud and righteous cry came. Zhou Xuanji and Zhangyo Dark Emperor turned around instinctively and saw a priest in a green robe flying toward them. The priest in a green robe was a little skinny. He had stubble by the side of his mouth, but his eyes were sharp. He held a horsetail whisk in his hand. Zhangyo Dark Emperor glanced at him and said with disdain, "I was wondering who it was. So it's Zhou Yalong's son, Zhou Zhongdao. If I kill you, will Zhou Yalong come after me?" Zhou Zhongdao shouted, "Let that kid go. If you have the guts, fight me." "Kid." Zhou Xuanji squinted his eyes and cursed in his heart. "I am your uncle." It was his first time meeting Zhou Zhongdao. Zhou Yalong had many wives and children. Zhou Zhongdao was the most famous and powerful son. Zhou Yalong thought highly of him. Chapter 96. Zhou Zhongdao moved like an arrow and quickly arrived in front of Zhangyo Dark Emperor. He waved the horsetail whisk in his right hand and a white light shot out from it. It turned into a long whip and lashed at Zhangyo Dark Emperor's body. Zhangyo Dark Emperor did not dodge. Even though he was hit, his expression did not change. He grinned and sneered, "Didn't you drink milk when you were young? Compared to your father, you're too weak." When Zhou Zhongdao heard this, he frowned and continued to wave his right hand. The white whip continued to hit Zhangyo Dark Emperor's body. Zhou Xuanji stood on the windcutter sword and observed the battle quietly. It was indeed an ox demon. High HP, thick skin and high endurance. Seeing that Zhou Xuanji had not left, Zhou Zhongdao was furious. He cursed loudly, "Get out of here. Do you think you can do whatever you want after breaking through to the inner pellet realm? If you don't get lost, you'll die here." When one sees injustice on the road, he will draw his sword to help. What he fears most is meeting a fool. Zhou Xuanji heard him and his face turned cold immediately. "This nephew of mine is a little jumpy and needs to be taught a lesson." At this moment, Zhangyo Dark Emperor suddenly grabbed the white whip and pulled it, pulling Zhou Zhongdao down from the sky. Bang! Zhou Zhongdao crashed into the small hill under Zhangyo Dark Emperor's feet, and it was a head-on collision. Zhou Xuanji felt pain just by looking at it. "Who asked you to have such a big mouth?" Zhangyo Dark Emperor leapt up. Zhou Zhongdao was about to cover his face when he was kicked out of the mountain wall. His body was so tall and sturdy that he weighed at least tens of thousands of pounds. Zhou Zhongdao was stomped on the ground by him, causing the ground to collapse. Blood splattered everywhere, and the sound of bones breaking was incomparably clear. Zhou Xuanji frowned and cursed in his heart, "You're so weak and you still dare to act like a hero." Although his father and grandmother were Zhou Xuanji's enemies, this boy dared to stand up for them, which meant that he was not a bad person. Zhou Xuanji could clearly distinguish between kindness and hatred, so he decided to save him. "Kid, you don't have your father's ability, but you do have your father's courage. If you die here today, Zhou Yalong won't even know. You asked for it." Zhangyo Dark Emperor raised his saber high and laughed ferociously. His laughter was extremely arrogant and even a little excited. He had met Zhou Yalong before, but he was no match for him. How could he not be excited now that he could kill the son of the future emperor of Great Zhou? Shio. An air-piercing sound could be heard. Zhangyo Dark Emperor's eyes narrowed. He waved the blade in his right hand and sent the bloodbath sword flying. He turned around and looked at Zhou Xuanji, who was standing on the windcutter sword. "Brat, you dare to attack me?" he roared. He slashed out with his saber and a black saber chi swept out. It was 100 feet long like a black crescent moon, and was extremely powerful. Zhou Xuanji immediately dodged with the 8-step sword lunge. He reappeared behind Zhangyo Dark Emperor. The sky-sundering Emperor sword appeared in his hand, and he directly used the power of the ancient sword Emperor. The method to use it was very simple. One just had to pour one's dermic powers into the blade, then withdraw it and pour it in again. After repeating this 3 times, one would be able to unleash the power of the ancient sword Emperor. Rumble! Zhou Xuanji felt a horrifying power explode in his body, and a visible aura flame appeared around his body. The ground beneath his feet cracked and pieces of rocks and grass flew into the air. He raised his sword and slashed forward. This sword was like a hidden dragon emerging from the abyss. The rainbow pierced through the sun and the power poured out. It felt so good that it could explode. Zhangyo Dark Emperor subconsciously swung his blade to block. Clang! The blade and the sword clashed, and Zhangyo Dark Emperor was sent flying. It was a majestic sight to see his gigantic body flying up. Zhou Zhongdao, who was lying on the ground, was dumbfounded. His eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. How can it be? Zhou Zhongdao could not believe his eyes, but the pain in his body told him that everything was real. Zhangyo Dark Emperor flew out nearly 100 meters. After he landed, he slid back a dozen meters, kicking up a trail of dust. He looked up at Zhou Xuanji in astonishment. "Who are you?" he roared furiously with gritted teeth. Zhou Xuanji held the sky-sundering Emperor sword in his right hand and the thunderclap sword in his left. The windcutter sword and bloodbath sword levitated above his shoulders, and the tips of the swords pointed at Zhangyo Dark Emperor. His expression was cold, but his heart was filled with excitement. So powerful. At this moment he felt boundless power. No matter who stood in front of him, he could defeat them all. He walked toward Zhangyo Dark Emperor and burst out in laughter. "Aren't you looking for Sword God Zhou? Zhou Xuanji said with a mocking smile which stunned Zhangyo Dark Emperor. Zhou Zhongdao, who just got up, was also stunned. He had heard of the name of Sword God Zhou. These 2 years the most famous person in Great Zhou was Sword God Zhou. So it's him? Zhou Zhongdao was stunned. He was ashamed in his heart and wanted to find a hole to hide in. How dare he call the famous Sword God Zhou a kid? He immediately understood that Sword God Zhou must have wanted to tease Zhangyo Dark Emperor, but he interrupted him. It was too embarrassing. At the same time he was a little touched. Even so, Sword God Zhou did not hold a grudge and helped him when he was in danger. Sword God Zhou. Zhangyo Dark Emperor roared. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. He dashed toward Zhou Xuanji with all his might. Zhou Xuanji also dashed toward Zhangyo Dark Emperor with the 8-step sword lunge. 10,000 Sword Dragon Incantation. Dual Swords Mode. 2 dragon roars could be heard. The Sky-Sundering Emperor Sword and the Thunderclap Sword were surrounded by a dragon-shaped sword chi. The 2 swords slashed toward Zhangyo Dark Emperor. The muscles on Zhangyo Dark Emperor's arms bulged. He was about to smash Zhou Xuanji into a meat patty. Clang! Zhangyo Dark Emperor was sent flying away again. The violent force made him feel an excruciating pain between his thumb and forefinger, and his face twisted. This guy's strength? Zhangyo Dark Emperor was shocked. No wonder the Gulan Demon Monarch wanted to kill Sword God Zhou so badly. Everyone was in awe of Sword God Zhou's sword techniques, but they did not know that his body was also very strong. Dual cultivation of essence and body. Zhou Xuanji quickly charged over. This time he directly used the Soul Eater Slash. Lightning intertwined on the 2 swords, and the aura flame on Zhou Xuanji's body grew tremendously. He slashed out with both swords and a violent gale swept out, causing the ground to crumble. 5 streams of black sword chi shot out vertically. At first glance, it looked like a demonic claw had appeared out of thin air. In front of it, even Zhangyo Dark Emperor seemed small. Zhangyo Dark Emperor's expression changed drastically, and he subconsciously raised his blade to block. There was a loud bang. His entire body was covered in blood and he was sent flying. His huge body was like a rolling stone, crashing into rocks and trees along the way. He flew a full 800 meters away. He gripped his saber with both hands and stabbed it into the ground, barely stabilizing his body. He spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground, his whole body trembling. His robe had many cuts and his body was covered in cuts. What sword technique is this? Those 2 swords are demonic swords? Zhangyo Dark Emperor thought in shock. He heard that Sword God Zhou had many swords, and each of them was a legendary sword. He immediately got up and transformed into his original form. He turned around and fled. The great saber shrunk and entered his ear. In his original form, although his body was still huge, his speed was really fast. He covered 200 meters in 3 steps, leaving deep hoof prints on the ground. Demon! Where are you going? With a loud cry, Zhou Xuanji flew on his sword and chased after them. Zhou Zhongdao stood up with difficulty. He looked at Zhou Xuanji's back with admiration. Zhangyo Dark Emperor was like a stray dog before him. Damn! Zhangyo Dark Emperor gritted his teeth and tensed his limbs. He ran with all his might, which created a strong gust of wind. At first glance, it looked like a layer of chi enveloped him. Unstoppable. At this moment, anyone who appeared in front of him would be frightened by his aura. Along the way, many cultivators who wandered the world were so frightened that they ran away in panic. Zhou Xuanji followed closely behind him. The man and the demon were as fast as the wind. Sword God Zhou. Do you really want to kill us all? Zhangyo Dark Emperor roared furiously as he sprinted. All the cultivators within a radius of 10,000 meters were stunned. Sword God Zhou? Why should I be merciful when I slay demons? Zhou Xuanji's voice resounded across the heavens and earth. It was so cold and filled with a murderous aura. Zhangyo Dark Emperor cursed in his heart. Such a hypocrite. Chapter 97. Although he had the power of the ancient Sword Emperor, Zhou Xuanji's speed could not catch up to Zhangyo Dark Emperor. Zhangyo Dark Emperor ran with all his might. The man and the demon crossed over the mountains and forests. Their speed was in a stalemate. He's heavily injured. I don't believe he won't stop. Zhou Xuanji's eyes were cold as he thought. Zhangyo Dark Emperor wanted to kill him, so he naturally couldn't let him go. At the same time, he wanted to make a big deal out of this matter so that the powerful figure of the demon race would not dare to act recklessly again. Along the way he madly attacked for hundreds of miles. Zhangyo Dark Emperor's speed began to decrease, and the distance between him and Zhou Xuanji shortened. Xiao. bloodbath sword suddenly flew over and stabbed Zhongyo Dark Emperor's back. Zhongyo Dark Emperor roared in pain. He was pleased with himself. How can you hurt my skin and flesh? The next second his expression became one of horror, because he could feel the bloodbath sword sucking his blood. He was so frightened that his ox body trembled and forced the bloodbath sword out of his body. The bloodbath sword quickly flew into Zhou Xuanji's body. In an instant, Zhou Xuanji felt that his stamina had recovered to its peak. As expected of an ox demon, it felt so good to have so much health. Zhou Xuanji's eyes sparkled. Next he tossed out the bloodbath sword continuously. Zhongyo Dark Emperor began to dodge, but every 3 times he dodged he would hit once. After all, he could not look back for fear that his speed would slow down. Just like that, Zhongyo Dark Emperor's HP decreased. However, he did not despair, because there was a Yao Kingdom up ahead. As long as he entered the Yao Kingdom he would have a chance of survival. He cursed in his heart, "The Gulan demon monarch tricked me." He even said that Sword God Zhou did not live up to his name. Your mother is trying to cover up your son's shame. He immediately hated the Gulan demon monarch. He hated him even more than Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji also noticed the waves of demonic qi coming from ahead. He had heard Zhao Congjian mention that there was a demon kingdom nearby, with hundreds of thousands of demon soldiers. The strongest demon had reached the 5th level of cultivation, which was comparable to the human race at the Spirit Spring stage. He did not stop and continued to move forward. A 5th-ranked demon king was no longer a threat to him. Rumble, Zhongyo Dark Emperor rushed into the forest with an unstoppable force, knocking down trees one after another. Dust flew everywhere. Looking down from the sky, it seemed like the forest was going to be split into 2. Zhou Xuanji flew above the forest. He asked in his heart, "Sword Spirit, how long can the power of the ancient Sword Emperor last?" Although Zhongyo Dark Emperor was severely injured, he would not be able to kill him without the power of the ancient Sword Emperor. Chapter 98. The city gate was broken open and the city walls shook. All the demon soldiers on top leaped down in panic. No one dared to stop Zhou Xuanji. Zhongyo Dark Emperor's tragic death was right in front of them. Who dared to go against Sword God Zhou? Zhou Xuanji stepped on the Windcutter sword, with the Sky-Sundering Emperor sword and Thunderclap sword in his hands and the Bloodbath sword above his head, and he approached the Demon Kingdom. Roar! A deafening roar came from the Demon Kingdom. The roar shook the mountains on both sides and rocks fell down. A muscular figure leaped up and flew over the city walls before landing on the ground. His legs crushed the grass beneath him. It was a demon king with a lion's head and a human body. He wore a tiger skin robe with scale armor inside. His mane was majestic and domineering and his mouth was filled with fangs. He looked extremely ferocious. Tianhou Lion King. He was the lord of this demon kingdom. He had cultivated for 1,000 years, and his power was unfathomable. He stared at Zhou Xuanji furiously. His body trembled in rage. Numerous shape-shifted demons flew up from the city and levitated in the air. Each of them held a weapon and looked ahead anxiously. A tense atmosphere before a battle spread across the heavens and the earth. Zhou Xuanji flew to Tianhou Lion King's head and looked down at him coldly. Thump. Tianhou Lion King knelt on the ground with his hands on the ground. "Sir." He gritted his teeth and said, "We are not friends with Zhongyo Dark Emperor. Please spare our lives." All the shape-shifted demons were stunned, but no one tried to dissuade him. Sword God Zhou was too powerful after all. Zhou Xuanji said expressionlessly, "Release everyone in the city. If you dare to hide even one person, I will chop off your head immediately and let all your demon descendants die with you." His voice was soft, but the murderous aura in it made Tianhou Lion King shiver. He immediately turned around and shouted with all his might, "Release everyone in the kingdom. Do not delay." He abandoned his dignity as the lord of the demon kingdom at this moment. Zhou Xuanji waited patiently. Those who were saved behind him did not leave but discussed excitedly. "He is the unparalleled Sword God Zhou? He's so powerful." Tianhou Lion King did not even dare to fart in front of him. From today onwards, whoever dares to say that Sword God Zhou's fame is greater than his power, I will be the first to beat him up. With this level of strength he's definitely a top-notch expert. If he were to enter the Great Zhou army, it wouldn't be difficult for him to reach the 2nd or 3rd rank. Oh my god, is that really Zhongyo Dark Emperor? In front of Sword God Zhou, he died in such a cowardly manner. How big is the difference in their power? Zhou Xuanji, who had his back to them, smiled. It seemed that he had underestimated his fame. He forgot about the pain in his body and only felt excited. Even though he worked hard to cultivate, the gap between him and Zhou Xuanji was still widening. Instead, he was filled with fighting spirit. Only a grandmaster in the sword's way like this was worth following. Zhou Xuanji stored the bookcutter sword into the supreme storage and came up to Han Shenbo with one step. He activated six-path sword shadow. Han Shenbo felt even more pressured. He felt that his opponent was not just one sword god Zhou. It was a group of sword god Zhou. He almost collapsed. How could he fight like this? If his cultivation was not higher than Zhou Xuanji's, he might have been killed in an instant. The sky-sundering emperor sword, which weighed thousands of kilograms, slashed at him continuously. Every time he faced the sword head-on, his arm would feel numb from the impact. Looking closely, the web between his thumb and forefinger was already bleeding. 10 breaths later, Han Shenbo was injured. 20 breaths later, Han Shenbo's right hand was crippled. He had no choice but to wield the fan with his left hand. He cast all sorts of spells, but he still could not break free from the siege of the legendary swords. 30 breaths later, Han Shenbo's left hand was crippled too. When the iron fan left his hand, Zhou Xuanji and six-path sword shadow activated the trisource vein-severing sword together. The sword chi engulfed Han Shenbo. A painful cry came from his mouth and reverberated across the wilderness. His vital channels were severed and he felt powerless instantly. 18 legendary swords pierced into his body from different directions, turning him into a porcupine. Thump. Han Shenbo knelt before Zhou Xuanji powerlessly. His body was covered in blood. His face was pale and his eyes were lifeless. He mumbled, "Impossible. Impossible? How could there be such an insane sword cultivator in the world?" In front of the 10,000 sword dragon incantation, he felt so helpless. Zhou Xuanji raised the sky-sundering emperor sword and pressed its tip against Han Shenbo's forehead to prevent him from falling to the ground. Han Shenbo's forehead was pierced, and blood flowed down the blade. The scene froze. Han Shenbo, who was pierced with 18 legendary swords, knelt before Zhou Xuanji. His forehead was pressed against by the sky-sundering emperor sword, which made Zhao Congjian and the rest breathe rapidly. They knew that Zhou Xuanji was more powerful than Han Shenbo, but they did not expect the gap to be so huge. It must be known that Zhou Xuanji had not activated Hell King possession yet. Too powerful. Zhou Xuanji looked at Han Shenbo with disdain and said, "Do you want to live or die?" The icy murderous aura made Han Shenbo shiver. "I want to live," he said instinctively. He was not even 100 years old, and he was ranked first on Great Zhou's hero ranking board. It was the highlight of his life. How could he die like this? He was not willing. "But I want you to die," Zhou Xuanji said calmly. He turned his right hand, and the tip of the sky-sundering emperor sword rotated like an electric drill, which made Han Shenbo's forehead feel excruciating pain. The pain made Han Shenbo more clear-headed. He endured the humiliation and said with gritted teeth, "As long as you spare my life, I am willing to be your slave. I will do whatever you ask me to do." Zhou Xuanji waved his left hand and a brush, paper, ink and brush appeared before Han Shenbo. Han Shenbo's pupils contracted suddenly. His smile was bitter and forced. "Write down a condition that can move me and put your handprint on it," Zhou Xuanji said slowly. "It would be a waste for the top rank on Great Zhou's hero ranking board to die like this." Han Shenbo raised his right hand with great difficulty, and it trembled continuously. Half a month later, Zhou Xuanji lay on the grass with a strand of weed in his mouth. Han Shenbo massaged his legs and asked with a flattering expression, "Master, this strength, how is it?" His acupoints were sealed by Huang Lianxin, and Zhao Congjian cast a spell on him. He could no longer activate his spirit energy and now he was like a cripple. To survive he could only struggle at death's door. Not only did he have to serve Zhou Xuanji, but he also had to listen to other people's orders. Zhou Xuanji nodded slightly and did not speak. He was waiting. Because he was 15 years old today. Zhou Xuanji did not reply, and Han Shenbo could only focus on massaging his legs and shoulders. A while later, Zhou Xuanji sat up suddenly, and Han Shenbo immediately stopped in fear. Analyzed that the sword owner has reached 15 years old. Gotcha started. Ding. Congratulations, the sword owner obtained. Holding Tempest Calmer in his right hand, he walked to the top of the slope, faced the blazing sun and swung his sword. There was no fancy sword technique, just an ordinary sword. As the blade fell, a strong gust of wind howled and gathered into a tornado that swept forward. Rumble, the entire hillside shook violently, and the nearby forest swayed unsteadily. Jiang Shui, Zhao Tsongjian and the rest turned around to look. They saw a 1,000-foot-tall tornado appearing behind the hill, sweeping up countless sand, dust and fallen leaves. It was a spectacular sight. Is that a sword technique? Zhao Tsongjian's eyes lit up. Northern Sword Valiant patted his shoulder and said, "Brother Zhao, stop looking. Stay calm." Zhao Tsongjian woke up with a start. He was drenched in cold sweat and quickly turned his head. "I can't think about it anymore. I need to learn the current sword technique first." Zhou Xuanji stored his sword and the 100-foot-tall tornado dissipated. The dust was still flying and it looked like a sandstorm. He turned around and walked down the hill. Han Shenbo came back to his senses from the shock. He quickly got up and walked to Zhou Xuanji's side. "Master, is there anything else you need me to do?" he asked carefully. Compared to his arrogant self half a month ago, he was like a completely different person. Zhou Xuanji waved his hand and said, "Go help the three-eyed drought rodent catch some insects, and help the hegemon-scaled black dragon take a bath." Han Shenbo heard him and his expression changed drastically. He wanted to say something but stopped. Zhou Xuanji ignored him and walked straight to Jiang Shui. As he walked, he took out the spirit-boosting bangle. The bangle was like a metal hoop. It would absorb the surrounding spiritual qi automatically and maintain a full state. Once he entered a battle, it would help him replenish his spirit energy. It was a good support enchanted artifact. He wore it on his right wrist and took out an age-halting pill. Age-halting pill, as the name suggested, could make one look young forever. This pill was a perfect birthday present for Jiang Shui. After getting the age-halting pill, Jiang Shui really liked it and even kissed Zhou Xuanji in front of everyone. Huang Lianxin was envious. Which woman doesn't want to stay young forever? Zhou Xuanji noticed her expression. He did not give her the age-halting pill immediately but promised to give it to her in the future. It was all for Huang Lianxin to work hard in her cultivation and help him out. After that, he came to Zhao Tsongjian's side and said, "Do you know where the sword monarch of Great Zhou is?" When Zhao Tsongjian heard this, he immediately sheathed his sword and asked, "Master, are you thinking of?" He challenged the sword monarch of Great Zhou and seized the sword noble. He immediately became excited. This was the Zhou Xuanji he knew. No matter who it was, they dared to fight. Chapter 101. Zhao Tsongjian flew back on his sword and landed in front of Zhou Xuanji. He knelt down on one knee and cupped his fist. "Master, the news has been sent out." Zhou Xuanji, who was internalizing qi, nodded slightly. Zhao Tsongjian asked doubtfully, "Why did this matter have to be spread out in advance? If he lost to the sword monarch of Great Zhou, wouldn't he become a joke to the world?" He didn't dare to say this out loud. Zhou Xuanji understood what he meant, so he opened his eyes and replied, "My identity, have you forgotten? The Empress of Great Zhou will definitely try her best to find trouble with me. The bigger this matter is, the more people it will attract. The Empress of Great Zhou is in the wrong. If she dares to deal with me in front of everyone, she probably doesn't want to keep her position anymore. At the same time, she can also attract Emperor Yan of Zhou's attention." Zhao Tsongjian frowned. He understood a little but felt that it was inappropriate. Zhou Xuanji let out a long breath and said, "To put it bluntly, I want everyone in the world to be my backer. The reason why the Great Zhou dynasty was able to establish itself in the Great Zhou dynasty was inseparable from those sects and families. What would the cultivation world think if the Empress of the Great Zhou dynasty attacked him? Doing so would chill the hearts of countless people. Of course, the Empress could also reveal Zhou Xuanji's identity, but it would be more difficult to do that. As the Empress, she actually dared to attack and kill a prince. She would become the laughingstock of the entire northern wilderness region." Zhao Tsongjian finally understood and said in admiration, "Good plan. In this way, if Master reveals his true identity in the future, he might really have the power to fight for the position of Crown Prince." The title of number 1 on the Great Zhou honor roll was extremely valuable. This proved that within Great Zhou, the name of Sword God Zhou had reached a stage where everyone knew about him. Zhou Xuanji shook his head and said, "I'm not interested in becoming the emperor. Being the emperor might seem impressive, but in reality, it was extremely troublesome. How could he be as carefree as he was now? As for power, Zhou Xuanji always had a plan. These sword slaves were the power he wanted. If they were to be nurtured into world-renowned experts who could fight against thousands of troops, wouldn't that be a form of authority? To be in charge of someone else's money was a small power. Controlling people's lives was a great power. Controlling the lives of the people in the world was the power of the world." Zhao Tsongjian looked at Zhou Xuanji with admiration. As a prince, Zhou Xuanji had such talent. The throne was not far from him, but he could still reject it. This was the magnanimity that a sword Dao grandmaster should have. 3 months later, Zhou Xuanji broke through to inner pellet level 4. He had to admit that the spirit-assisting bangle was quite powerful. It could even help him in his cultivation. On this day, Zhao Congjian came back to report the news. Master, I'm afraid the great Zhou dynasty will be in danger soon. Zhao Congjian said with a solemn expression, causing the others to gather around. Zhou Xuanji opened his eyes and said, "Speak." Zhao Congjian immediately told him everything he knew. Recently, the Northern Wilderness region's demonic sect, Xinhao sect, had their eyes on Great Zhou. Xinhao sect colluded with the demonically fire sect in the Great Zhou dynasty and started to attack the dynasties near the Great Zhou dynasty. Not only that, but the demon monarch of Gulan was also on the move. 10 days ago, the southern Snow Kingdom's border was breached. Countless civilians were killed and the kingdom was turned into a living hell. The Great Zhou dynasty had already sent reinforcements. In just one season, the flames of war had been ignited in the Great Zhou dynasty, and the country was in danger. Zhou Xuanji frowned and mumbled, "If the situation becomes critical and Great Zhou falls into chaos, it will not be good for us. The Empress will surely wait for an opportunity to make her move." Emperor Yan of Zhou's gaze was always on the entire Great Zhou. Han Shimbu's expression changed drastically and said, "Xinhao sect? That's one of the top 10 sects in the Northern Wilderness region. It can even shake an empire. With the help of the demon monarch of Gulan, Great Zhou is really in trouble." His teacher was a sanctum which was located outside of Great Zhou. Naturally, he knew more about the Northern Wilderness region. Jiang Shui asked curiously, "Since Xinhao sect is so powerful, why did they attack Great Zhou? Aren't they afraid that both sides will suffer great losses?" Zhao Congjian said, "I heard that the top prodigy of Xinhao sect, Huang Ming, was in isolated cultivation in a valley and was ambushed by Zhou Yalong. In the end, both of them left with severe injuries. Huang Ming bore a grudge and informed Xinhao sect's sect lord, Ta Tianqian. Ta Tianqian was infuriated and declared war against Great Zhou." "So careless?" Zhou Xuanji asked with a strange expression. "Isn't this too childish?" But this also showed how important Huang Ming was to Xinhao sect. It also showed Ta Tianqian's character. He would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Zhao Congjian nodded and said solemnly, "Ta Tianqian is not weaker than Emperor Yan of Zhou." Han Shenbo swallowed his saliva and said, "Let's leave Great Zhou." The little black snake nodded, "I agree." Zhou Xuanji fell into deep thought and did not reply. Half a year later, Zhou Xuanji broke through to inner pellet level 5. With this speed he could break through to Soul Fountain at 18 years old. Zhao Congjian only broke through to inner pellet when he was 18 years old, but his talent was already comparable to Zhou Yalong's. 3 days later, Zhao Congjian returned. His expression was more solemn than half a year ago. Everyone gathered around wanting to hear more news. Zhao Congjian came up to Zhou Xuanji and said with gritted teeth, "Bad news." Zhou Xuanji opened his eyes and asked, "What is it?" "Ta Tianqian's grandson, Ta Qishue, heard about your fame and declared that he wants to challenge you. If you don't go within 3 months, he will massacre the entire Southern Snow Kingdom." Now, the Southern Snow Kingdom is already occupied by Xinhao sect, and the population is less than 10% of what it used to be. "Master, if you go, you will most likely die. If you don't go, the fame that you built will go to waste." As he spoke, Zhao Congjian clenched his fists. His face was filled with hatred. Jiang Shui opened her beautiful eyes wide and said, "This Ta Qishue guy, is he sick in the head? Did our Xuanji offend him?" Zhou Xuanji was speechless too. He was sitting at home but the pot fell from the sky. Han Shenbo reminded him, "Ta Qishue is very talented. When he was at Inner Pellet he killed someone at Soul Fountain. Now he might have broken through to Soul Fountain. You better not go." Of course he did not really care about Zhou Xuanji. It was only because of the blood contract that he had to lower his head. Zhou Xuanji looked at Zhao Congjian and asked, "Have you heard of the Hidden Sword sect?" Jiang Shui heard him and shuddered. She covered her chest with her hands. She immediately understood what Zhou Xuanji meant. Zhao Congjian frowned and said, "Isn't that a small sect in the Southern Snow Kingdom? They are either dead or locked up in the Southern Snow Kingdom." Zhou Xuanji stopped talking and began to think. "Master, please reconsider. Xinhao sect is an evil sect. If you defeat Ta Qishue, can you escape?" Huang Lianxin reminded, "Even if you don't go, the world will only criticize you for a while. They will not really blame you. Great Zhou did not do anything, why should you care?" Beixiao Wangjian looked at Zhao Congjian and asked, "Yeah, what about Great Zhou? Are they not going to do anything?" Zhao Congjian sighed, Great Zhou is in a terrible situation. Not long ago, Meng Tianlang led his army to the southern Snow Kingdom and was utterly defeated. Even Meng Tianlang was locked up in the southern Snow Kingdom and became a prisoner. If we bear with it, Great Zhou should be able to resolve its crisis in at most a few years. The other empires will not ignore it. If Great Zhou falls, the other empires will follow in its footsteps. Meng Tianlang knelt down too. The group fell into silence. At this moment, Zhou Xuanji looked up suddenly and said, 2 months later, we will depart for the southern Snow Kingdom. With this, everyone's expression changed drastically. Chapter 102. 2 months later. Zhou Xuanji and the others packed their things and headed towards the southern Snow Kingdom. Anada's back. Jiang Shui asked Zhou Xuanji softly, Xuanji, are you really not going to reconsider? She knew why Zhou Xuanji wanted to go to the southern Snow Kingdom. It was definitely because of Qiu Beili. But in her heart, Zhou Xuanji was more important than Qiu Beili. She did not want Zhou Xuanji to be killed. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, I don't want to regret. Hearing this, Jiang Shui no longer tried to persuade him. Wait for me outside the southern Snow Kingdom. Zhou Xuanji tilted his head and said. The beauty behind him was the most important person in his life, and he did not want her to follow him into danger. Jiang Shui shook her head and said, No matter where you go, I will accompany you. Even if I have to die, it will be the same in the past, the present, and the future. Zhou Xuanji felt a warmth in his heart, but he said unpleasantly, Are you going to accompany me and be a burden? Jiang Shui glared at him. I'm currently at the second level of the enlightening realm. I'm proficient in all 5 elemental spells and healing spells. I'm the healer that you've always mentioned. If you're injured, I can help you. As she spoke, she pinched Zhou Xuanji's waist and said coquettishly, You dare to look down on me? Zhou Xuanji curled his lip and said, Can you be more gentle? You weren't like this when you were young. It's all because of your pampering. Jiang Shui blushed as she said in a low voice. She would only act like this to Zhou Xuanji. Towards others, she would be very polite and maintain a certain distance. Zhou Xuanji looked ahead with determination in his eyes and said, I still want to dote on you for another 10,000 years. Don't worry, from this trip to southern snow, we will both come back alive. Jiang Shui's heart was filled with sweetness. She rested her chin on his shoulder, hugged his waist and slowly closed her beautiful eyes. Southern Snow Kingdom. The once prosperous dynasty was filled with smoke, and every city had been reduced to ruins. In the center of the empire, only Monarch City remained standing. The city walls were filled with the figures of demonic cultivators. They were all wearing the same dark yellow robes with 2 large words imprinted on their backs. Xin Hao. In Wangqing, the number of Xinhao sect's demonic cultivators was uncountable. They could be found all over the streets. There were many corpses lying on the streets, and many prisoners were chained to the corners of the walls, unable to move. Qiu Beili and a group of hidden sword sect cultivators were imprisoned on a dilapidated street. The iron chains on their bodies were connected to each other, with long nails piercing into the ground at both ends. Everyone's shoulder blades were pierced through, and their meridians were severed. They were like cripples. Qiu Beili's clothes were tattered, his hair was messy, and his face was covered in scabs. He leaned against the wall and looked at the sky blankly. Even Meng Tianlang was defeated. It won't be long before we are the ones to be beheaded. An old man muttered to himself in despair, causing the others around him to tremble. They had suffered all kinds of torture and humiliation. In the end, they couldn't escape death, so they might as well commit suicide. But who could truly face death? A hidden sword sect female disciple gritted her teeth and said, Ta Qishue has already announced that he wants to challenge Sword God Zhou. As long as Sword God Zhou wins against him, he will let us go. We still have hope. Sword God Zhou will surely come. When the other disciples heard this, their eyes lit up. The hidden sword sect practiced the sword, so everyone in the sect naturally looked up to Sword God Zhou. That's right. Sword God Zhou will definitely come. Sword God Zhou is kind and generous. He will surely not give up on us. He is not even afraid of the Empress of Great Zhou and the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou. Of course, he is not afraid of Ta Qishue. When the Sword God comes, he will surely defeat Ta Qishue. The hidden sword sect disciples were all excited and discussed softly. Qiu Beili's body trembled. When he heard the word Sword God Zhou, he could not help but think of Zhou Xuanji. It was said that Sword God Zhou had a small physique which was very similar to Zhou Xuanji. But no matter how devilish Zhou Xuanji was, he could not be this devilish, right? In just a short 10 years, he had already reached the stage where the whole world knew about him. It shouldn't be him. That kid was extraordinarily talented. He should be trying to break through to inner pellet. How could he kill Qin Chitsuan, Tai Yulong, and Zhang Yo Dark Emperor? It's a pity that I cannot see you again in this life. Qiu Bailey sighed faintly. In his heart, he had already treated Zhou Xuanji and Jiang Shui as his grandchildren. When he was not cultivating, he would always miss the two kids. Of course, he only missed them and not worried. With the little devil Zhou Xuanji around, Jiang Shui would not be at a disadvantage. At this moment, a group of evil cultivators passed by with a prison cart. The people on both sides of the street looked up and saw a lonely silhouette sitting paralyzed in the prison cart. It was Meng Tianlang. At this moment, Meng Tianlang did not look as majestic as before. His hair was disheveled, his armor was removed, and his black shirt was tattered and stained with blood. He lowered his head and his eyes were hollow like a dead person. Did you see a dark horse? Your great Zhou's second-ranked genius on the hero ranking board is nothing more than this. On the prison cart, a silhouette sat and laughed wildly. He was Ta Chi Shua. He looked like he was in his early 20s. He was handsome and devilishly handsome. His long hair was coiled under his silver crown, and he wore a luxurious red robe that looked like it was dyed with blood. Looking at him, the people on both sides of the street dared not to say anything. Ta Chi Shua bent his right leg and placed his right hand on his right knee. His posture was lazy, but his smile was a little maniacal. If Sword God Zhou dares to come, he will be my next human pet. I know that all of you are looking forward to Sword God Zhou's arrival. I'm looking forward to it too. I can't wait to see him kneeling and begging for mercy. Ah, Ta Chi Shua said and laughed. He did not take Sword God Zhou seriously at all. Everyone on the street stared at him with red eyes. If looks could kill, Ta Chi Shua would have already been torn into pieces. The troops continued to advance. Ta Chi Shua planned to let all the captives see Meng Tianlang's miserable state. Ming! The dragon eagle's cry resounded through the sky. On Ah Big's back, Zhou Xuanji held the furious ape sword in his left hand. He also transferred his spirit-boosting bangle to his left hand. Even though he had been charging for 10 days, his hand did not feel sore at all. Compared to the last time, his cultivation had risen greatly, so he was naturally more relaxed. Zhao Congjian carried the little black snake, Beishao Wangjian carried Han Shenbua, and Huang Lianxin rode on her sword alone. The group of people swept past the mountains like immortals. Zhao Congjian turned around and said, "Master, we are still half a day away from the Southern Snow Kingdom. We will need another 2 days to reach the royal city of the Southern Snow Kingdom." Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, "After a while, we will stop and rest for a while before heading toward the Southern Snow Royal City at full speed." No one had any objections. 2 hours later, they landed on the plains to rest. As far as the eye could see, they could already see the outline of the Southern Snow Kingdom's border. Zhou Xuanji began to deploy the plan, and the group listened quietly. After he finished, Han Shenbua could not hold it anymore and said, "Can you unseal me? I'm completely useless now." The top rank of Great Zhou's hero ranking board was reduced to an ordinary person. Following Zhou Xuanji and the rest like this was suicide. Zhou Xuanji glanced at him and said, "If we can survive this battle, I will unseal you." Han Shenbua heard him and his face turned pale, and he broke out in a cold sweat. The little black snake came to his side and straightened his body. "Don't even think about it. Do you know how many years of torture I have suffered? You have not even been here for a year. Continue to wait." Chapter 103. The group rested for 2 hours before continuing toward the Southern Snow Kingdom. The Southern Snow Kingdom's border custom was covered with corpses. There were human corpses and demon corpses. Blood dyed the ground red. It was hard to imagine how intense the battle must have been. Some demon corpses were as huge as a hill, which was a shocking sight. Even the border customs city wall had dozens of holes. Zhou Xuanji and the group flew past the border custom unobstructed. The tragic scene along the way made their hearts heavy. Only the little black snake was still cheerful. It looked around on small air's back with greedy eyes. The ground was filled with food. Occasionally there were even living demons foraging for rotten meat. Desolate. Desolate. A murderous atmosphere pervaded the heavens and earth. Zhou Xuanji held the furious ape sword in his left hand and the sky-sundering emperor sword in his right. He held the sword with both hands and looked ahead, ready to fight. Beishao Wangjian smiled and said, "This might be what Master said. You know there's a tiger on the mountain, but you still want to go there." "Of course. Let's fight together and die together. Our lives will not be in vain." Zhao Congjian smiled proudly with a heroic spirit. Huang Lianxin stared at him and said, Don't say such depressing words. With Master around we can all come out alive. That's right. We will not die. Jiang Shui waved her fist and said excitedly. The group looked at each other and laughed. The tense atmosphere dissipated immediately. The southern snow royal city. Ta Qishue sat on a tiger-skin chair in front of the palace gate and enjoyed the shoulder massage from two enchanting ladies. He held his wine cup and looked at the square below the stone stairs. Two inner pellet prisoners were fighting to the death. One of them had lost an arm but was still fighting with gritted teeth. Between the two of them only one could survive. At this moment an evil cultivator from Xinhao sect came to Ta Qishue's back and said softly, "Young master, Sword God Zhou has entered the southern snow kingdom." Having heard that, Ta Qishue immediately sat up straight. He smiled and said, "Very good. I want to see how powerful this guy who ranked first on Grey Zhou's reputation ranking is. Pass my order. Do not stop Sword God Zhou." After the evil cultivator received the order, he turned into a wave of demonic qi and disappeared. Ta Qishue was elated. He immediately channeled his spirit energy and shouted, "Sword God Zhou has entered the southern snow kingdom. By then all of you can come and watch the battle. Watch how I defeat your Sword God Zhou." His voice spread throughout the city, causing all the captives to be moved. On one of the streets, under a tree, Zhang Tianjian and Zhang Ruyu were both excited. The two of them looked like beggars, disheveled and unkempt, with injuries all over their bodies. "Senior Zhou is here. We're saved." He immediately stood up and stepped on Ah Big's head with his left foot. He held his sword with both hands and channeled his spirit energy. "Ta Qishue, I Sword God Zhou am here." His voice swept across all directions and spread across the entire southern Snow King's city. The entire city was in an uproar. Sword God Zhou really came. Qiu Bailey heard his voice and fell into a daze. Zhou Xuanji's voice was already changing, but he still felt a sense of familiarity. Boom! A horrifying demonic qi exploded from the center of the city like a long black pillar. The thunderclouds gathered and connected the heavens and the earth. It was a majestic sight. "Ha! Sword God Zhou, do you dare to come in and fight me? If you can defeat me, I will let everyone in this city go." Ta Qishue's arrogant laughter came from the city. He sounded extremely excited. As the grandson of Xinhao sect's sect lord, he was equally talented. Even Meng Tianlang was not his match in a one-on-one fight. Zhou Xuanji said this and leaped up. "You guys wait here. I will enter the city alone." The wind cutter sword appeared under his feet out of nowhere and flew toward the southern Snow King's city. Jiang Shui was extremely anxious. She held the flaming fan tightly in her right hand. The others were the same. Zhou Xuanji tried to persuade them for a long time. They only agreed after he threatened them. If all of them entered the city they would be like trapped beasts in a cage. Soon Zhou Xuanji flew past the city wall. The evil cultivators looked up at him. "He doesn't look that powerful?" "The rumors are true. The swords in his hands are not ordinary. That sword is so majestic. Could it be a level 6 enchanted artifact?" TSK. This brat is really seeking death. Take a guess. How long can he live?" The evil cultivators discussed among themselves and did not take Zhou Xuanji seriously. To them, Zhou Xuanji was a fool to come alone. If such a fool did not die, who would? Ta Qishue looked at Zhou Xuanji curiously and asked in amazement as he sized him up. Zhou Xuanji replied calmly, "That's because I grew up." "Grown up? Were you really a child?" Ta Qishue was even more curious. He rubbed his chin and pondered. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow and asked, "If I defeat you, will you really keep your promise?" Ta Qishue smiled and said, "Xinhao sect is not an evil sect without principles. As long as you defeat me, all the captives in the city can leave." He waved his right hand and two fiendish cultivators leapt out from behind the high wall on the left side of the plaza. They carried a prisoner cart to the ground and Meng Tianlang was imprisoned inside. Seeing Meng Tianlang's miserable appearance, Zhou Xuanji slightly narrowed his eyes. Meng Tianlang was also stunned and lowered his head in shame. Back then he had missed his appointment with Zhou Xuanji, and the person he feared seeing the most was Zhou Xuanji. He did not expect Ta Qishue to be so vicious that he actually escorted him out. It was worse than killing him. "Do you know him? He's ranked second on Great Zhou's hero ranking board. He brought an army to rescue us, but he's the only one left alive. Don't you think it's funny?" Ta Qishue pointed at Meng Tianlang and laughed. His laughter sounded insane and in Zhou Xuanji's eyes, it sounded like he was sick. Zhou Xuanji raised his right hand and pointed the sky-sundering emperor sword at Ta Qixue. Don't talk so much. If you want to fight, let's fight. He was still holding the furious ape sword in his left hand and had been accumulating energy. He had the confidence to deal with Ta Qixue, but to guard against the powerful cultivators from Xinhao sect, he had never stopped accumulating energy. Ta Qixue heard him and laughed even more wildly. He opened his hands and two curved blades appeared in his hands. The two blades were filled with an evil qi. The blades were blood-red as though they were just drawn out from a pool of blood. With the blades in his hands he walked toward Zhou Xuanji. If you lose, you will become my human pet just like him. Ta Qixue laughed coldly and turned into a ferocious demon in an instant. Demonic qi surrounded his body, and his fiendish aura soared into the sky. As soon as he finished speaking, he dashed forward. In the blink of an eye he came up to Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji leaped up and slashed down furiously with the sky-sundering emperor sword in his right hand. The blades clashed, and the horrifying force caused Ta Qixue's arms to tremble a little. Such a heavy sword. Ta Qixue was shocked in his heart. He turned around and slashed horizontally with both blades. Zhou Xuanji flew into the air. He moved his right hand quickly and activated the vibrant raindrop sword. Countless sword stars descended. Ta Qixue swung his blades and deflected all the sword stars. Ding, ding, ding. The sword stars landed on the blades and there was a sound of metal clashing.